Good evening, everyone. How are you all doing tonight? I hope that you're all having a wonderful evening. Welcome in. How's it going there, Nawaria? Welcome in, Missy. How's it going, SMC? Hope that you've all been having a good Wednesday. Today we're going to be doing something special. It's been a little while since we've done one of these, but I'm going to do one of my classic reading streams. Also, welcome in, YNC. How are you doing? Yes, it's time for story time, voice. I've been spending the last 10 minutes or so doing some vocal warm-ups so that I can hopefully bring you all a wonderful storytelling experience. But today is going to be a couple of firsts. For one, let me show you into my my parlor for the season. Welcome in, everybody. It's a nice little spot, isn't it? I hope that you can grab a seat and get comfortable. I'll be with you in just a moment. Ah, here I am. Welcome in, everybody. How are you all? Also, welcome in, Sarah. How are you? Oh, I could probably try to find a way to make the clock go backwards, but it would probably also reverse the rain sounds. This is just a video that's playing in the background. But yes, welcome into my spooky parlor. But not too spooky. Feel free to grab some refreshments. Perhaps some tea, some little cakes. Make yourself nice and cozy. If you want something to drink, I myself am having a glass of scotch. This is some Singleton malt scotch, as well as some black tea. Hopefully that'll be keeping my voice in tip-top shape as we do our readings tonight. But yes, throughout the month I'm going to be reading spooky stories. We'll see how many I can get through, or if I just manage to get through the one. But the one that we are starting with is, as the title says, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Published in 1818, supposedly originally written on a castle vacation where Mary Shelley, Percy B. Shelley, and Lord Byron decided to go on a little castle vacation and wrote some spooky stories to have some activity so that they could do something other than opium and orgies in that castle, I guess. But this is I have here the Dover Thrift Edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's not a terribly thick book, but we'll see how well practiced my pipes are for this. See how much we can get through. Now, this is actually a second-hand copy that I had academically, meaning there were students who've owned this book before me. And in the book, in various sections, there are highlighter marks, as well as a bunch of things underlined, and notes written in pen. So it's almost like I'm getting two stories at once. I'm getting the story of Frankenstein, the story of whoever used this highlighter to highlight certain phrases, and the story of whoever penned in their notes into the margins of these pages. Hopefully they haven't covered up any of the words that I actually need to read. Oh, they've aggressively underlined this segment. Yes, once again, I hope that you are all having a wonderful Wednesday evening. and I hope that I can make this a wonderful, lovely, and comfortable experience for you all. So without further ado, let us begin with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Letter 1. To Miss Saville of England, from St. Petersburg, December 11th, 17 blankety blank. You will rejoice to hear that no disaster has accompanied the commencement of an enterprise which you have regarded with such evil forebodings. I arrived here yesterday, and my first task is to assure my dear sister of my welfare and increasing confidence in the success of my undertaking. I'm already far north of London, and as I walk in the streets of Petersburg, I feel a cold northern breeze play upon my cheeks, which braces my nerves and fills me with delight. Do you understand this feeling? This breeze, which has traveled from the regions towards which I am advancing, gives me a foretaste of those icy climes. Inspirited by this wind of promise, my daydreams become more fervent and vivid. I try in vain to be persuaded that the pole is the seat of frost and desolation. It ever presents itself to my imagination as the region of beauty and delight. There, Margaret, the sun is forever visible, its broad disk just skirting the horizon and diffusing a perpetual splendor. There, for with your leave, my sister, I will put some trust in preceding navigators. There snow and frost are banished, and sailing over a calm sea, we may be wafted to a land surpassing in wonders and in beauty every region hitherto discovered on the habitable globe. Its productions and features may be without example, as the phenomena of the heavenly bodies undoubtedly are in those undiscovered solitudes. What may not be expected in a country of eternal light? I may there discover the not to... Sorry. There's a line that made that difficult to read. Okay. I may there discover the wondrous power which attracts the needle, and may regulate 1,000 celestial observations that require only this voyage to render their seeming eccentricities consistent forever. I shall satiate my ardent curiosity with the sight of a part of the world never before visited, and may tread a land never before imprinted by the foot of man. These are my enticements, and they are sufficient to conquer all fear of danger or death, and to induce me to commence this laborious voyage with the joy a child feels when he embarks in a little boat with his holiday mates on an expedition of discovery up his native river. But supposing all these conjectures to be false, you cannot contest the inestimable benefit which I shall confer on all mankind to the last generation, by discovering a passage near the pole to those countries to reach which at present so many months are requisite, or by ascertaining the secret of the magnet, which, if at all possible, can only be effected by an undertaking such as mine. These reflections have dispelled the agitation with which I began my letter, and I feel my heart glow with an enthusiasm which elevates me to heaven, for nothing contributes so much to tranquilize the mind as a steady purpose, the point on which the soul may fix its intellectual eye. This expedition has been the favorite dream of my early years, and I have read with ardor the accounts of the various voyages which have been made in the prospect of arriving at the North Pacific Ocean, through seas which surround the pole. You may remember that a history of all the voyages made for purposes of discovery composed the whole of our good Uncle Thomas's library. My education was neglected, yet I was passionately fond of reading. These volumes were my study, day and night, and my familiarity with them increased that regret which I had felt, as a child, on learning that my father's dying injunction had forbidden my uncle to allow me to embark in a seafaring life. These visions faded when I perused for the first time those poets whose effusions entranced my soul and lifted it to heaven. I also became a poet, and for 1 year lived in a paradise of my own creation. I imagined that I might also obtain a niche in the temple, where the names of Homer and Shakespeare are consecrated. Fucking lofty goals there, dude. But, Mary Shelley made it. You are well acquainted with my failure and how heavily I bore the disappointment, but just at that time I inherited the fortune of my cousin, and my thoughts were turned into the channel of their earlier bent. 6 years have passed since I resolved on my present undertaking. I can, even now, remember the hour from which I dedicated myself to this great enterprise. I commenced by inuring my body to hardship, becoming immune. I accompanied the whale fishers on several expeditions to the North Sea. I voluntarily endured cold, famine, thirst, and want of sleep. I often worked harder than the common sailors during the day and devoted my nights to the study of mathematics, the theory of medicine, and those branches of physical science from which a naval adventure might derive the greatest practical advantage. Twice I actually hired myself as an undermate in a Greenland whaler, and acquitted myself to admiration. I must own I felt a little proud when my captain offered me the second dignity in the vessel and entreated me to remain with the greatest earnestness, so valuable did he consider my services. And now, dear Margaret, do I not deserve to accomplish some great purpose? My life might have been passed in ease and luxury, but I preferred glory to every enticement that wealth placed in my path. Oh, that some encouraging voice would answer in the affirmative. My courage and my resolution is firm, but my hopes fluctuate and my spirits are often depressed. I'm about to proceed on a long and difficult voyage, the emergencies of which will demand all my fortitude. I'm required not only to raise the spirits of others, but sometimes to sustain my own when theirs are falling. This is the most favorable period for traveling in Russia. They fly quickly over the snow in their sledges. The motion is pleasant, and in my opinion far more agreeable than that of an English stagecoach. The cold is not excessive if you are wrapped in furs, a dress which I have already adopted, for there is a great difference between walking the deck and remaining seated motionless for hours, when no exercise prevents the blood from actually freezing in your veins. I have no ambition to lose my life on the post road between St. Petersburg and Archangel. I shall depart for the later town in a fortnight or 3 weeks, and my intention is to help a ship there, which can easily be done by paying the insurance for the owner, and to engage as many sailors as I think necessary among those who are accustomed to whale fishing. I do not intend to sail until the month of June. And when shall I return? Ah, dear sister, how can I answer this question? If I succeed, many, many months, perhaps years, will pass before you and I may meet. But if I fail, you may see me again soon. Or never. Farewell, my dear Margaret. Heaven shower down blessings on you, and save me that I may again testify my gratitude for all your love and kindness. Your affectionate brother, R. Walton. So we haven't actually gotten to our main man yet. Also, how's it going, honey? How are you doing? Welcome in. I hope that you're having a good evening. Welcome into my parlor. Also, for anybody who's wondering what this Mothman, Bearman is all about, this was actually the work of Honey Hitman here. Also, welcome in, Cryo. How are you doing? So this is the the little PNG that I'm going to be using for whenever I do one of these reading streams. But yes, welcome in. We're just about to start our second letter here. So the second letter, once again, to Miss Seville of England, from Archangel, March 28th, 17 blankety blank. How slowly the time passes here, encompassed as I am by frost and snow, yet a second step is taken towards my enterprise. I've hired a vessel and am occupied in collecting my sailors, those whom I have already engaged. They appear to be men on whom I can depend and are certainly possessed of dauntless courage. Yeah, I ended up reading this in full for one of my university courses. I actually did a course on horror literature, whereupon we read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, of course, as well as Bram Stoker's Dracula. I actually have just over there a super annotated version of Dracula that has a whole bunch of cliff notes and contexts and whatnot. as well as things like the literary werewolf and a bunch of other things for that course. Oh, did you spot a ghost? You spotted a spooky ghost? Goodness me. I actually recently discovered that I have 2 copies of Northanger Abbey. Because I ended up buying it twice for school because it was on 2 of my course lists. What out the window there? Oh, okay. One moment. Let me see this ghost that you have spotted. Oh my! How spooky. Duende. It's funny. If only I could turn around to look, but I have to be a good host and keep to my reading and facing my guests. You can feel free to look at all of the things out the window, though. But yeah, I have 2 copies of it because I ended up in 2 separate courses the same year having to read it, and I just kind of mindlessly grabbed everything on my reading list from the bookstore. It was actually, funny enough, they had it organized for us. Like, the courses would actually tell us which shelves they were on for the, like, university bookstore. And it was definitely a fucking racket, as proved by the fact that I had 2 copies of Northanger Abbey. And they're actually 2 different copies. Like, different covers and whatnot. In different locations in the bookstore. For 2 courses in the same major. Also, welcome in, Omegan. How are you doing? Hope you're having a good one. Thank you again very much for that carp sub. And welcome into my reading stream. We're just about to get started on the 2nd chapter of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So, here we go. Letter 2 to Miss Savelle of England. Sorry, I'm just going to reread that first sentence. From Archangel, March 28th, 17 blank blank. How slowly time passes here, encompassed as I am by frost and snow, yet a second step is taken towards my enterprise. I've hired a vessel and am occupied in collecting my sailors, those whom I have already engaged. They appear to be men on whom I can depend and are certainly possessed of dauntless courage. But I have one want, which I have never yet been able to satisfy, in the absence of the object which I now feel as a most severe evil. I've no friend, Margaret. When I'm glowing with the enthusiasm of success, there'll be none to participate in my joy. If I am assailed by disappointment, no one will endeavor to sustain me in dejection. I shall commit my thoughts to paper, it's true, but that is a poor medium for the communication of feeling. I desire the company of a man who could sympathize with me, whose eyes would reply to mine. You may deem me romantic, my dear sister, but I bitterly feel the need for a friend. I have no one near me, gentle yet courageous, possessed of a cultivated as well as of a capricious mind, whose tastes are like my own, to approve or amend my plans. How could such a friend repair the faults of your poor brother? I'm too ardent in execution, and too impatient of difficulties. But it is a still greater evil to me that I am self-educated. For the first 14 years of my life, I ran wild on a common, and read nothing but Uncle Thomas's books of voyages. At that age, I became acquainted with the celebrated poets of our own country, but it was only when it had ceased to be in my power to derive its most important benefits from such a conviction that I perceived the necessity of becoming acquainted with more languages than that of my native country. Now I'm 28. Oh wow, he sounds rather robust. He's got a lot of gravitas for 28. Now I am 28 and am in reality more illiterate than many schoolboys of 15. It is true that I have thought more and that my daydreams are more extended and magnificent, but they want, as the painters call it, keeping. And I greatly need a friend who would have sense enough not to despise me as a romantic and affection enough for me to endeavor to regulate my mind. Well, these are useless complaints. I shall certainly find no friend on the wide ocean, nor even hear an archangel among merchants and seamen. Yet some feelings, unallied to the dross of human nature, beat even in these rugged bosoms. My lieutenant, for instance, is a man of wonderful courage and enterprise. He's madly desirous of glory, or rather, to word my phrase more characteristically, of advancement in his profession. He's an Englishman, and in the midst of national and professional prejudices, unsoftened by cultivation. He retains some of the noblest endowments of humanity. I first became acquainted with him on board a whale vessel, finding that he was unemployed in the city. I easily engaged him to assist in my enterprise. The master is a person of excellent disposition, and is remarkable in the ship for his gentleness and the mildness of his discipline. Also, 18th century English writing is always like this. They're always like, ah yes, he was of excellent disposition. Whenever they describe these kinds of characters, it's always that exact phrase. I counted and checked that he had all of his teeth and fingers, excellent disposition, no yellowing of the eyes, his shoes were free of dust and cigarette ash. This circumstance, added to his well-known integrity and dauntless courage, made me very desirous to engage him. A youth passed in solitude, my best years, spent under your gentle, feminine fosterage, has also refined the groundwork of my character, that I cannot overcome an intense distaste to the usual brutality exercised on board a ship. I've never believed it to be necessary, and when I heard of a mariner equally noted for his kindliness of heart and the respect and obedience paid to him by his crew, I felt myself peculiarly fortunate in being able to secure his services. I heard of him first, in rather a romantic manner, from a lady who owes to him the happiness of her life. This, briefly, is his story. Some years ago, he loved a young Russian lady of moderate fortune, and having amassed a considerable sum in prize money, the father of the girl consented to the match. He saw his mistress once before the destined ceremony, but she was bathed in tears, and, throwing herself at his feet, entreated him to spare her, confessing at the time that she loved another, but that he was poor, and her father would never consent to the union. Many such stories. My generous friend reassured the suppliant, and on being informed of the name of the lover, instantly abandoned his pursuit. He had already bought a farm with his money on which he had designed to pass the remainder of his life, but he bestowed the whole on his rival, together with the remains of his prize money, to purchase stock, and then himself solicited the young woman's father to consent to her marriage with her lover. But the old man decidedly refused, thinking himself bound in honor to my friend, who, when he found the father inexorable, quitted his country nor returned until he heard that his former mistress was married according to her inclinations. What a noble fellow, you will exclaim. He is so, but then he is wholly uneducated. He is as silent as a Turk, and a kind of ignorant carelessness attends him, which, while it renders his conduct the more astonishing, detracts from the interest and sympathy which otherwise he would command. Yet do not suppose, because I complain a little, or because I can conceive a consolation for my toils, which I may never know, that I am wavering in my resolutions. Those are fixed as fate, and my voyage is only now delayed until the weather shall permit my embarkation. The winter has been dreadfully severe, but the spring promises well, and it is considered as a remarkably early season, so that perhaps I may sail sooner than I expected. I shall do nothing rashly. You know me sufficiently to confide in my prudence and considerateness whenever the safety of others is committed to my care. I cannot describe to you my sensations on the near prospect of my undertaking. It's impossible to communicate to you a conception of the trembling sensation, half pleasurable and half fearful, which I am preparing to depart. I'm going to unexplored regions. the land of mist and snow. But I shall kill no albatross, therefore do not be alarmed for my safety, or if I should come back to you as soon and woeful as the ancient mariner. You will smile at my illusion, but I will disclose a secret. I have often attributed my attachment to my passionate enthusiasm for the dangerous mysteries of the ocean, to that production of the most imaginative modern poets. Speaking of, that's something that was actually a similarity shared between Frankenstein and Dracula. So Frankenstein was actually published around 80 years-ish before Dracula. The story actually predates that one by quite a bit. So to see mention of that same poem in both of these books is interesting. I guess The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Rime as in R-I-M-E, not as in R-H-Y-M-E. Meaning ice and frost, I believe, is basically a poem about a ghost ship, or a ship that turns up where nobody is aboard. And that ship in particular was, I guess, yeah, so in the consciousness for those 100 years, I believe it was published in the late 1700s, that it made it into all sorts of horror literature because it just kind of is some seriously spooky imagery. Having a ship still just sailing with absolutely nobody on it. And I mean, honestly, I feel like to this day, that imagery reverberates in a lot of horror fiction. Where was I? There's something at work in my soul which I do not understand. I'm practically industrious, painstaking, a workman to execute with perseverance and labor, but besides this, there's a love for the marvelous, a belief in the marvelous, intertwined in all my projects, which hurries me out of the common pathways of men, even to the wild sea and unvisited regions I'm about to explore. But to return to dearer considerations, shall I meet you again after having traversed immense seas and returned by the most southern cape of Africa or America? I dare not expect such success, yet I cannot bear to look on the reverse of the picture. Continue for the present to write to me by every opportunity. I may receive your letters on some occasions when I need them most to support my spirits. I love you very tenderly. Remember me with affection, should you never hear from me again. Your affectionate brother, Robert Walton. This guy has signed his name slightly differently every time. He was R. Walton, now he's Robert Walton, and next he's just going to be R.W. Anyway, continuing on. Letter 3 to Miss Saville of England, July 7th, 17 .. My dear sister, I write a few lines in haste to say that I am safe and well advanced on my voyage. This letter will reach England by a merchantman now on its homeward voyage from Archangel, more fortunate than I, who may not see my native land perhaps for many years. I am, however, in good spirits. My men are bold and apparently firm of purpose, nor do the floating sheets of ice that continually pass us, indicating the dangers of the region towards which we are advancing, appear to dismay them. We have already reached a very high latitude, but it is the height of summer. Although not so warm as in England, the southern gales, which blow us speedily towards these shores, which I so ardently desire to attain, breathe a degree of renovating warmth which I had not expected. No incidents have hitherto befallen us that would make a figure in a letter. One or two stiff gales and the springing of a leak are accidents which experienced navigators scarcely remember to record, and I shall be well content if nothing worse happened to us during our voyage. Adieu, my dear Margaret. Be assured that for my own sake, as well as yours, I will not rashly encounter danger. I'll be cool, persevering, and prudent. But success shall crown my endeavors, wherefore not? Thus far I've gone, tracing a secure way over the pathless seas, the very stars themselves being witness and testimonies of my triumph. Why not still proceed over the untamed yet obedient element? What can stop the determined heart and resolved will of man? My swelling heart involuntarily pours itself out thus. But I must finish. Heaven bless my beloved sister, R.W. So that is a line that actually reminds me a lot of this book's secondary title. The book is Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. Ooh, my My coffee is my coffee is completely stuck to the coaster. That's some friction. Not my coffee, my tea rather. So this was a big thing in Romanticism. The idea of the potential of humankind dreaming in such a way to make wonderful and fantastic discoveries. That kind of elevation of this kind of protagonist, somebody who was exploring an unexplored territory, was kind of a big thing in the Romanticism era where this book came out. Mary Shelley, Percy B. Shelley, and especially Lord Byron are known as being kind of emblematic of romantic literature. Romantic as in the Romanticism movement of the 1800s, not necessarily romance as in love. But yeah, we'll definitely see a lot more of where the secondary title, Modern Prometheus, really shows through. Prometheus, of course, being the god who granted fire to humankind, illuminating their way, and thus being punished for doing so. Okay. Letter 4. To Miss Saville of England. August 5th, 17 blank blank. So strange an accident has happened to us that I cannot forbear recording it, though it is very possible that you will see me before these papers can come into your possession. Last Monday, that is July 31st, we were nearly surrounded by ice, which closed in the ship on all sides, scarcely leaving her the sea room in which she floated. Our situation was somewhat dangerous, especially as we were compassed round by a very thick fog. We accordingly lay to, hoping that some change would take place in the atmosphere and weather. About 2 o'clock, the mist cleared way, and we beheld, stretched out in every direction, vast and irregular plains of ice, which seemed to have no end. Some of my comrades groaned, and my own mind began to grow, watchful with anxious thoughts, when a strange sight suddenly attracted our attention and diverted our solitude from our own situations. We perceived a low carriage fixed on a sledge and drawn by dogs, passed on towards the north at a distance of half a mile. A being which had the shape of a man, but apparently of gigantic stature, sat in the sledge and guided the dogs. We watched the rapid progress of the traveler with our telescopes until he was lost among the distant inequalities of the ice. This appearance excited our unqualified wonder. We were, as we believed, many hundred miles away from any land, but this apparition seemed to denote that it was not, in reality, so distant as we had supposed. Shut in, however, by the ice, it was impossible to follow this track, which we had observed with the greatest attention. About 2 hours after this occurrence, we heard the ground sea, that is, a swell of the ocean which occurs in calm weather, and without obvious cause, breaking on the shore in heavy rollers. This book's got footnotes. It's the only footnote I've seen in the book so far, but we got footnotes. I love footnotes. About 2 hours after this occurrence, we heard the ground sea, and before night the ice broke and freed our ship. We, however, lay to until the morning, fearing to encounter in the dark those large, loose masses which float about after the breakage of the ice. I profited of this time to rest for a few hours. In the morning, however, as soon as it was light, I went upon deck and found all the sailors busy on one side of the vessel, apparently talking to someone in the sea. It was, in fact, a sledge like we had seen before, which had drifted towards us in the night on a large fragment of ice. Only one dog remained, but there was a human being with it, whom the sailors were persuading to enter the vessel. He was not the other traveler. He was not, as the other traveler seemed to be, a savage inhabitant of some undiscovered island, but a European. When I appeared on deck, the master said, Here is our captain, and he will not allow you to perish on the open sea." On perceiving, the stranger addressed me in English, although with a foreign accent. "Before I come on board your vessel," said he, "you will have the kindness to inform me whither you are bound." You may conceive my astonishment on hearing such a question addressed to me from a man on the brink of destruction, and to whom I should have supposed that my vessel would have been a resource which he could not have exchanged for all the most precious wealth the earth can afford. I replied, however, that we were on a voyage of discovery towards the northern pole. Upon hearing this, he appeared satisfied and consented to come on board. Good God, Margaret, if you had seen the man who thus capitulated for his safety, your surprise would have been boundless. His limbs were nearly frozen and his body dreadfully emaciated by fatigue and suffering. I've never seen a man in so wretched a condition. We attempted to carry him into the cabin, but as soon as he had quitted the fresh air, he fainted. We accordingly brought him back to the deck and restored him to animation by rubbing him with brandy and forcing him to swallow a small quantity. As soon as he showed signs of life, we wrapped him up in blankets and placed him near the chimney of the kitchen stove. By slow degrees, he recovered and ate a little soup, which restored him wonderfully. 2 days passed in this manner before he was able to speak, and I often feared that his sufferings had deprived him of understanding. When he had, in some measure, recovered, I removed him to my own cabin and attended on him as much as my duty would permit. I never saw a more interesting creature. His eyes have generally an expression of wildness, even madness. But there are moments when, if anyone performs an act of kindness towards him, or does him the most trifling service, his whole countenance is lighted up, as it were, with a beam of benevolence and sweetness that I've never seen equaled. But he is generally melancholy and despairing, and sometimes he gnashes his teeth as if impatient of the weight of woes that oppresses him. When my guess was a little recovered, I had great trouble to keep off the men who wished to ask him 1,000 questions, but I would not allow him to be tormented by their idle curiosity in a state of body and mind whose restoration evidently depended upon entire repose. Once, however, the lieutenant asked why he had come so far upon the ice in so strange a vehicle. His countenance instantly assumed an aspect of the deepest gloom, and he replied, "To seek one who fled from me." "And did the man whom you pursued travel in the same fashion?" "Yes." "Then I fancy we've seen him, for the day before we picked you up, we saw some dogs drawing a sledge with a man in it across the ice." This aroused the stranger's attention, and he asked a multitude of questions concerning the route, which the daemon, as he called him, had pursued. Soon after, when he was alone with me, he said, "I have doubtless excited your curiosity, as well as that of these good people, but you are too considerate to make inquiries. Certainly it would indeed be very impertinent and inhuman in me to trouble you with any inquisitiveness of mine. And yet you rescued me from a strange and perilous situation. You've benevolently restored me to life." Soon after this, he inquired if I thought that the breaking up of the ice had destroyed the other sledge. I replied that I could not answer with any degree of certainty, for the ice had not broken until near midnight, and the traveler might have arrived at a place of safety before that time, but of this I could not judge. From this time, a new spirit of life animated the decaying frame of the stranger. He manifested the greatest eagerness to be upon deck to watch for the sledge which had before appeared, but I've persuaded him to remain in the cabin, for he is far too weak to sustain the rawness of the atmosphere. I've promised that someone should watch for him and give him an instant notice if any new object should appear in sight. Such is my journal of what relates to this strange occurrence up to the present day. The stranger has gradually improved in health, but it is very silent and appears uneasy when anyone except myself enters the cabin. Yet his manners are so conciliating and gentle that the sailors are all interested in him, although they have very little communication with him. For my own part, I begin to love him as a brother, and his constant and deep grief fills me with sympathy and compassion. He must have been a noble creature in his better days, being even now in wreck so attractive and amiable. I said in one of my letters, my dear Margaret, that I should find no friend on the wide ocean, and yet I found a man who, before his spirit had been broken by misery, I should have been happy to have possessed as the brother of my heart. Yeah, suddenly a brother. Though we'll see how that goes. I shall continue my journal concerning the stranger at intervals, should I have any fresh incidents to record. August 13th. My affection for my guest increases every day. He excites at once my admiration and my pity to an astonishing degree. How can I see so noble a creature destroyed by misery without feeling the most poignant grief? He's so gentle, yet so wise. His mind is so cultivated. And when he speaks, although his words are culled with the choicest art, yet they flow with rapidity and unparalleled eloquence. He is now much recovered from his illness and is continually on the deck, apparently watching for the sledge that preceded his own. Yet, although unhappy, he is not so utterly occupied by his own misery, but that he interests himself deeply in the projects of others. He has frequently conversed with me on mine, which I have communicated to him without disguise. He entered attentively into all my arguments in favor of my eventual success, and into every minute detail of the measures I had taken to secure it. I was easily led by the sympathy which he evinced to use the language of my heart, to give utterance to the burdening ardor of my soul, and to say with all the fervor that warmed me how gladly I would sacrifice my fortune, my existence, my every hope to the furtherance of my enterprise. One man's life or death were but a small price to pay for the acquirement of the knowledge which I sought, for the dominion I should acquire and transmit over the elemental foes of our race. As I spoke, a dark gloom spread over my listener's countenance. First I perceived that he tried to suppress his emotion. He placed his hands before his eyes, and my voice quivered and failed me as I beheld tears trickle fast from between his fingers. A groan burst from his heaving breast. I paused. At length, he spoke, in broken accents. "Unhappy man! Do you share my madness? Have you drunk also of the intoxicating draught? Hear me. Let me reveal my tale, and you will dash the cup from your lips." Such words, you may imagine, strongly excited my curiosity. But the paroxysm of grief that had seized the stranger overcame his weakened powers, and many hours of repose and tranquil conversation were necessary to restore his composure. Having conquered the violence of his feelings, he appeared to despise himself for being the slave of passion, and quelling the dark tyranny of despair, he led me again to converse concerning myself personally. He asked me the history of my earlier years. The tale was quickly told, but it awakened various trains of reflection. I spoke of my desire of finding a friend, or my thirst for a more intimate sympathy with a fellow mind than had ever fallen to my lot, and expressed my conviction that a man could boast of little happiness who did not enjoy this blessing. "I agree with you," replied the stranger. "We are unfashioned creatures, but half made up. If one wiser, better, dearer than ourselves, such a friend ought to be. Do not lend his aid to perfectionate our weak and faulty natures. I once had a friend, the most noble of human creatures, and am entitled, therefore, to judge respecting friendship. You have hope in the world before you, and have no cause for despair. But I have lost everything, cannot begin life anew." As he said this, his countenance became expressive of a calm, settled grief that touched me to the heart, but he was silent and presently retired to his cabin. Pardon me, one moment. I'm out of practice. I gotta do more of these reading streams. Okay. As he said this, his countenance became expressive of a calm, settled grief that touched me to the heart, but he was silent and presently returned to his cabin. Even broken in spirit as he is, no one can feel more deeply than he does the beauties of nature. The starry sky, the sea, and every sight afforded by these wonderful regions seems still to have the power of elevating his soul from earth. Such a man has a double existence. He may suffer misery and be overwhelmed by disappointments, yet when he has retired into himself, he will be like a celestial spirit that has a halo around him, within whose circle no grief or folly ventures. Will you smile at the enthusiasm I express concerning this divine wanderer? You would not if you saw him. You've been tutored and refined by books and retirement from the world, and you are, therefore, somewhat fastidious. But this only renders you the more fit to appreciate the extraordinary merits of this wonderful man. Sometimes I have endeavored to discover what quality it is which he possesses that elevates him so immeasurably above any other person I ever knew. I believe it to be an intuitive discernment, a quick but never failing power of judgment, a penetration into the causes of things, unequaled for clearness and precision. Add to this a facility of expression and a voice whose varied intonations are soul-subduing music. August 19th. Oh, looks like whoever owned this book previously has written a little note in the margins that says, "Danger and search for knowledge." Thank you, previous owner. Yesterday, the stranger said to me, "You may easily perceive, Captain Valton, that I have suffered a great and unparalleled misfortune. I had determined at one time that the memory of these evils should die with me, but you have won me to alter my determination. You seek for knowledge and wisdom, as I once did, and I ardently hope that the gratification of your wishes may not be a serpent to sting you as mine has been. I do not know what the relation of my disasters will be useful to you, yet when I reflect that you are pursuing the same course, exposing yourself to the same dangers which have rendered me what I am, I imagine that you may deduce an apt moral from my tale, one that may direct you if you succeed in your undertaking, and console you in case of failure. Prepare to hear of occurrences which are usually deemed marvelous. Were we among the tamer scenes of nature, I might fear to encounter your unbelief, perhaps your ridicule. But many things will appear possible in these wild and mysterious regions, which would provoke the laughter of those unacquainted with the ever-varied powers of nature. Nor can I doubt but that my tale conveys in its series internal evidence of the truth of the events which it is composed. You may easily imagine that I was much gratified by the offered communication, yet I could not endure that he should renew his grief by a recital of his misfortunes. I felt the greatest eagerness to hear the promised narrative, partly from curiosity and partly from a strong desire to ameliorate his fate. Sorry, that was, I'm gonna say ameliorate is a word that I have heard only in this book. And partly from a strong desire to ameliorate his fate, if it were in my power. I expressed these feelings in my answer. "I thank you," he replied, "for your sympathy, but it is useless. My fate is nearly fulfilled. I wait but for one event, and then I shall repose in peace. I understand your feeling," continued he, perceiving that I wished to interrupt him, "but you are mistaken, my friend, if thus you will allow me to name you. Nothing can alter my destiny. Listen to my history, and you will perceive how irrevocably it is determined." Oh, have you? I mean, do you know where in particular, or is it just in pieces of old or fantasy literature? It's obviously the kind of word that you would only use modernly if you had a thesaurus addiction. I've managed to curb my thesaurus addiction ever so slightly when it comes to writing. Oh, no kidding. Rare 5-star word. Probably on CBC? Okay, fair enough. Alright. He then told me that he would commence his narrative the next day, when I should be at leisure. This promise drew me from the warmest thanks. I've resolved every night when I am not imperatively occupied by my duties to record, as nearly as possible in his own words, what he has related during the day. If I should be engaged, I will at least make notes. The manuscript will doubtless afford you the greatest pleasure, but to me, who know him, and who hear it from his own lips, with what interest and sympathy shall I read it in some future day? Even now, as I commence on my task, his full-toned voice swells in my ears. His lustrous eyes dwell on me with all their melancholy sweetness. I see his thin hand raised in animation, while the lineaments of his face are irradiated by the soul within. Strange and harrowing must be his story. Frightful the storm which embraced the gallant vessel on its course and wrecked it thus. Just fucking kiss him already. Jesus. Alright, so that's the letters. We're actually, we're moving into chapter 1 next. So I hope that you are all enjoying this evening of literature. I hope that everybody is having a good, comfy time. I'm liking getting the chance to do this again. I definitely missed doing my reading streams. And once again, thank you very much to Honey for finishing the Moth Bear with the reading. I think that's just the touch that these streams needed. That in the background. Oh look, there's a ghost again. Where's he going? But yeah, I definitely recommend it. Let me just make sure that my voice is taken care of so that I'm not wearing it out. Make sure to have lots and lots of sippies. Okay, there we go. Okay. So finally, Chapter 1. I am by birth a Genovese, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My ancestors had been for many years counselors and syndics. Footnote, syndics, municipal magistrates. And my father had filled several public situations with honor and reputation. He was respected by all who knew him for his integrity and indefatigable attention to public business. He passed his younger days perpetually occupied by the affairs of his country. A variety of circumstances had prevented his marrying early, nor was it until the decline of life that he became a husband and the father of the family. As the circumstance of his marriage illustrates his character, I cannot refrain from relating them. One of his most intimate friends was a merchant who, from a flourishing state, fell through numerous mischances into poverty. This man, whose name was Beaufort, was of a proud and unbending disposition, and could not bear to live in poverty and oblivion in the same country where he had formerly been distinguished for his rank and magnificence. Having paid his debts, therefore, in the most honorable manner, he retreated with his daughter to the town of Lucerne, where he lived unknown and in wretchedness. My father loved Beaufort with the truest friendship and was deeply grieved by his retreat in these unfortunate circumstances. He bitterly deplored the false pride which led his friend to conduct so little worthy of the affection that united them. He lost no time in endeavoring to seek him out with the hope of persuading him to begin the world again through his credit and assistance. Beaufort had taken effectual measures to conceal himself, and it was 10 months now before my father discovered his abode. Overjoyed at his discovery, he hastened to the house, which was situated in a mean street near Zoris. But when he entered, misery and despair alone welcomed him. Beaufort had saved but a very small sum of money from the wreck of his fortunes, but it was sufficient to provide him with sustenance for some months. And in the meantime, he hoped to procure some respectable employment in a merchant's house. The interval was consequently spent in inaction. His grief only became more deep and rankling. When he had leisure for reflection, and at length it took so fast hold of his mind that at the end of 3 months he lay on a bed of sickness, incapable of any exertion. His daughter attended him with the greatest tenderness, but she saw with despair that their little fund was rapidly decreasing, and that there was no other prospect of support. But Caroline Beaufort possessed a mind of an uncommon mold, and her courage rose to support her in her adversity. She procured plain work, she plaited straw, and by various means contrived to earn a pittance scarcely sufficient to support life. Several months passed in this manner. Her father grew worse, her time was more entirely occupied in attending him, her means of subsistence decreased, and in the 10th month her father died in her arms, leaving her an orphan and a beggar. This last blow overcame her, and she knelt by Beaufort's coffin, weeping bitterly. When my father entered the chamber, he came like a protecting spirit to the poor girl, who committed herself to his care, and after the interment of his friend, he conducted her to Geneva, and placed her under the protection of a relation. 2 years after this event, Caroline became his wife. There was a considerable difference between the ages of my parents, but this circumstance seemed to unite them only closer in the bonds of devoted affection. There was a sense of justice in my father's upright mind which rendered it necessary that he should approve highly to love strongly. Perhaps during former years he had suffered from the late discovered unworthiness of one beloved, and so was disposed to set a greater value on tried worth. There was a show of gratitude and worship in his attachment to my mother, differing wholly from the doting fondness of age, for it was inspired by reverence of her virtues and a desire to be the means of, in some degree, recompensing her for the sorrows she had endured, but which gave inexpressible grace to his behavior to her. Everything was made to yield to her wishes and her convenience. He strove to shelter her, as a fair exotic is sheltered by the gardener, from every rougher wind, and to surround her with all that could tend to excite pleasurable emotion in her soft and benevolent mind. Her health, and even the tranquility of her hitherto constant spirit, had been shaken by what she had gone through. During the 2 years that had elapsed previous to their marriage, my father had gradually relinquished all his public functions, and immediately after their union they sought the pleasant climate of Italy, and the change of scene and interest attended on a tour through that land of wonders as a restorative for her weakened frame. From Italy they visited Germany and France. I, their eldest child, was born at Naples, and as an infant accompanied them in their rambles. I remained for several years their only child. Much as they were attached to each other, they seemed to draw inexhaustible stores of affection from a very mine of love to bestow them upon me. My mother's tender caresses and father's smile of benevolent pleasure while regarding me are my first recollections. I was their plaything and their idol, and something better, their child, the innocent and helpless creature bestowed on them by heaven, whom to bring up good, and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct happiness or misery, according as they fulfilled their duties towards me. with this deep consciousness of what they owed towards the being which they had given life, added to the active spirit of tenderness that animated both, it may be imagined that while during every hour of my infant life I received a lesson of patience, of charity, and of self-control, I was so guided by a silken cord that all seemed but one train of enjoyment to me. For a long time, I was their only care. My mother had so much desire to have a daughter, but I continued their single offspring. When I was about 5 years old, while making an excursion beyond the frontiers of Italy, they passed a week on the shores of Lake Como. Their benevolent disposition often made them enter cottages of the poor. This to my mother was more than a duty, it was a necessity, a passion. Remembering what she had suffered and how she had been relieved, for her to act in her turn the guardian angel to the afflicted. During one of their walks, a poor cot in the foldings of a vale attracted their notice as being singularly disconsolate, while the number of half-clothed children gathered round it spoke of penury in the worst shape. One day, when my father had gone by himself to Milan, my mother, accompanied by me, visited his abode. She found a peasant and his wife, hard-working, bent down by care and labor, distributing a scanty meal to 5 hungry babes. Among these there was one which attracted my mother far above all the rest. She appeared of a different stock. The 4 others were dark-eyed, hardy little vagrants, but this child was thin and very fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold, and despite the poverty of her clothing, seemed to set a crown of distinction on her head. Her brow was clear and ample, her blue eyes cloudless, and her lips and the molding of her face so expressive of sensibility and sweetness that none could behold her without looking on her as of a distant species, being heaven-sent and bearing a celestial stamp in all her features. The peasant woman, perceiving that my mother fixed eyes of wonder and admiration on this lovely girl, eagerly communicated her history. She was not her child, but the daughter of a Milanese nobleman. Her mother was German and had died on giving birth. The infant had been placed with these good people to nurse. They were better off then. They had not been long married, and their eldest child was but just born. The father of their charge was one of those Italians nursed in the memory of the antique glory of Italy, one among the Schiavari Ognore Fermenti, that is, always restless slaves, who exerted himself to obtain the liberty of his country. He became the victim of its weakness. Whether he had died or still lingered in the dungeons of Austria was not known. His property was confiscated, his child became an orphan and a beggar. She continued with her foster parents and loomed in their rude abode, fairer than a garden rose among dark-leaved brambles. When my father returned from Milan, he found, playing with me in the hall of our villa, a child fairer than a pictured cherub, a creature who seemed to shed radiance from her looks, and whose form and motions were lighter than the chamois of the hills. The apparition was soon explained, and with his permission my mother prevailed on her rustic guardians to yield their charge to her. They were fond of the sweet orphan. Her presence had seemed a blessing to them, but it would be unfair to her to keep her in poverty and want when Providence afforded her such powerful protection. They consulted their village priest, and the result was that Elizabeth Lavenza became the inmate of my parents' house, my more-than-sister, the beautiful and adored companion of all my occupations and my pleasures. Everyone loved Elizabeth. The passionate and the most reverential attachment with which all regarded her became, while I shared it, my pride and my delight. On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother had said playfully, "I've a present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." And then on the morrow she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift. I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed on her I received as made to a possession of my own. We called each other familiarly by the name of cousin. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me, my more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only. That's chapter 1. Gonna take another drink. I feel today is going to mostly be background for the story before we quite get into the rising action. Being that we are in Act 1, of course. Okay. Moving on then. Chapter 2. We were brought up together. There was not quite a year difference in our ages. I need not say that we were strangers to any species of disunion or dispute. Harmony was the soul of our companionship, and the diversity and contrast that subsisted in our characters drew us nearer together. Elizabeth was of a calmer and more concentrated disposition, but with all my ardor I was capable of a more intense application, and was more deeply smitten with the thirst for knowledge. She busied herself with following the aerial creations of the poets, and in the majestic and wondrous scenes which surrounded our Swiss home. The sublime shapes of the mountains, the changes of the seasons, tempest and calm, the silence of winter, and the life and turbulence of our alpine summers. She found ample scope for admiration and delight. While my companion contemplated with a serious and satisfied spirit the magnificent appearances of things, I delighted in investigating their causes. The world was to me a secret which I desired to divine. Curiosity, earnest research to learn the hidden laws of nature, gladness akin to rapture, as they were, unfolded to me, among the earliest sensations I can remember. On the birth of a second son, my junior by 7 years, my parents gave up entirely their wandering life and fixed themselves in their native country. We possessed a house in Geneva and a campagna on Bellerive, the eastern shore of the lake. Also, campagna is a country place, according to this footnote here. So, the eastern shore of the lake at the distance of rather more than a league from the city. We resided principally in the latter, with the lives of my parents passed into considerable seclusion. It was my temper to avoid a crowd and to attach myself fervently to a few. I was indifferent, therefore, to my schoolfellows in general, but I united myself in the bonds of the closest friendship to one among them. Henry Clerval was the son of a merchant of Geneva. He was a boy of singular talent and fancy. He loved enterprise, hardship, and even danger for its own sake. He was deeply read in books of chivalry and romance. He composed heroic songs and began to write many a tale of enchantment and knightly adventure. He tried to make us act plays and to enter into masquerades in which the characters were drawn from the heroes of Roncesvalles, of the Round Table of King Arthur, and the chivalrous train who shed their blood to redeem the Holy Sepulchre from the hands of the infidels. No human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself. My parents were possessed by the very spirit of kindness and indulgence. We felt that they were not the tyrants to rule our lot according to their caprice, but the agents and creators of all the many delights which we enjoyed. When I mingled with other families, I distinctly discerned how peculiarly fortunate my lot was, and gratitude assisted the development of filial love. Also, this entire paragraph was highlighted. My temper was sometimes violent, and my passions vehement, but by some law in my temperature, that is, temperament according to the footnote, they were turned not towards childish pursuits, but to an eager desire to learn, and not to learn all things indiscriminately. I confess that neither the structure of languages, nor the code of governments, nor the politics of various states possessed attractions for me. It was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn, and whether it was the outward substance of things or the inner spirit of nature and the mysterious soul of man that occupied me, still my inquiries were directed to the metaphysical, or, in its highest sense, the physical secrets of the world. Meanwhile, Clerval occupied himself, so to speak, with the moral relations of things. The busy stage of life, the virtues of heroes, and the actions of men were his theme, and his hope and his dream was to become one among those whose names are recorded in story as the gallant and adventurous benefactors of our species. The saintly soul of Elizabeth shone like a shrine-dedicated lamp in our peaceful home. Her sympathy was ours, her smile, her soft voice, and the sweet glance of her celestial eyes were ever there to bless and animate us. She was the living spirit of love to soften and attract. I might have become sullen in my study, rough through the ardor of my nature, but that she was there to subdue me to a semblance of her own gentleness. And Clerval, who ought ill entrench on the noble spirit of Clerval, yet he might not have been so perfectly humane, so thoughtful in his generosity, so full of kindness and tenderness amidst his passion for adventurous exploit, had she not unfolded him to the real loveliness of beneficence, and made the doing good the end and aim of his soaring ambition. Well, there's an entire section here that's highlighted that has the word foreshadowing written beside it, but I'm not going to say which section it is. I feel exquisite pleasure in dwelling on the recollections of childhood before misfortune had tainted my mind and changed its bright visions of extensive usefulness into gloomy and narrow reflections upon self. Besides, in drawing the picture of my early days, I also record those events which led by insensible steps to my aftertale of misery. For when I would account myself for the birth of that passion which afterwards ruled my destiny, I find it arise like a mountain river from ignoble and almost forgotten sources. But, swelling as it proceeded, it became the torrent which, in its course, has swept away all my hopes and joys. Natural philosophy is the genius that has regulated my fate. I desire, therefore, in this narration to state those facts which led to my predilection for that science. Wait, that's the part? Okay, never mind not telling you which part it is. That's the fucking sentence that they highlighted as foreshadowing. How is that foreshadowing? Mance is just saying, by the way, I got into science. When I was 13 years of age, we all went on a party of pleasure to the baths near Thonon. The inclemency of the weather obliged us to remain a day confined to the inn. In this house I chanced to find a volume of the works of Cornelius Agrippa, who is Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa von Nietesheim, 1486 to 1535, author of De Occulta Philosophia, in which he claimed that the study of magic was the best means to know God and nature. I opened it with apathy. The theory which he attempts to demonstrate and the wonderful facts which he relates soon changed this feeling into enthusiasm. A new light seemed to dawn upon my mind, and bounding with joy, I communicated my discovery to my father. My father looked carelessly at the title page of my book and said, "Ah, Cornelius Agrippa! My dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash." If, instead of this remark, my father had taken the pains to explain to me that the principles of Agrippa had been entirely exploded and that a modern system of science had been introduced which possessed much greater powers than the ancient because the powers of the latter were chimerical, while those of the former were real and practical, under such circumstances, I should certainly have thrown Agrippa aside and have contented my imagination, warmed as it was, by returning with greater ardor to my former studies. That sentence was 8 lines long, holy shit. It is even possible that the train of my ideas would never have received the fatal impulse that led to my ruin. But the cursory glance my father had taken of my volume by no means assured me that he was acquainted with its contents, and I continued to read with the greatest avidity. When I returned home, my first care was to procure the whole works of this author, and afterwards of Paracelsus, the alchemist. I've actually read Paracelsus. And Albertus Magnus. Okay, so Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus. Paracelsus, or Theophrastus Bombastus Hohenheim, Yeah, so the reason that the character in Full Metal Alchemist is named Hohenheim is because he was named after Paracelsus. The more you know. Was a Swiss alchemist and physician, and then Albertus Magnus was a philosopher and natural scientist. I read and studied the wild fancies of these writers with delight. They appeared to me treasures known to few besides myself. I've described myself as always having been imbued with a fervent longing to penetrate the secrets of nature. In spite of the intense labor and wonderful discoveries of modern philosophers, I always came from my studies discontented and unsatisfied. Sir Isaac Newton is said to have avowed that he felt like a child picking up shells beside the great and unexplored ocean of truth. Those of his successors in each branch of natural philosophy with whom I was acquainted appeared even to my boy's apprehensions as tyros engaged in the same pursuit. The untaught peasant beheld the elements around him and was acquainted with their practical uses. The most learned philosopher knew little more. He had partially unveiled the face of nature, but her immortal lineaments were still a wonder and a mystery. He might dissect, anatomize, and give names, but not to speak of a final cause, causes in their secondary and tertiary grades were utterly unknown to him. I had gazed upon the fortifications and impediments that seemed to keep human beings from entering the citadel of nature, and rashly and ignorantly I had repined. But there were books, and here were men who had penetrated deeper and knew more. I took their word for all that they averred, and I became their disciple. I may appear strange that such should arise in the 18th century, but while I followed the routine of education in the schools of Geneva, I was to a great degree self-taught with regard to my favorite studies. My father was not scientific, and I was left to struggle with a child's blindness added to a student's thirst for knowledge. Under the guidance of my new preceptors, I entered with the greatest diligence into the search of the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life, but the latter soon obtained my undivided attention. Wealth was an inferior object, but what glory would attend the discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death? Nor were these my only visions. The raising of ghouls or devils was a promise liberally accorded to my favorite authors, the fulfillment of which I most eagerly sought, and if my incantations were always unsuccessful, I attributed the failure rather to my own inexperience and mistake than to a want of skill or fidelity in my instructors. And thus, for a time, I was occupied by exploded systems, mingling like an unadept, a thousand contradictory theories and floundering desperately in a very slough of multifarious knowledge, guided by an ardent imagination and childish reasoning till an accident again changed the current of my ideas. Yeah, really, this dude picked up a magic book when he was 13, and he was like, "Ayo, Philosopher's Stone, Eternal Life? Let's go! How do you make one of these, by the way?" And then Paracelsus just goes, That's what I'm trying to find out, man. Mostly we just fuck around with vinegar and sulfuric acid. Occasionally we'll throw a drop of mercury in there for fun. And then young Frankenstein goes, "Oh, but a little drop of mercury, how saturnine." And Paracelsus goes, "I don't get it." When I was about 15 years old, we had retired to our house near Bellerive, when we witnessed a most violent and terrible thunderstorm. It advanced from behind the mountains of Jura, and the thunder burst at once with frightful loudness from various quarters of the heavens. I remained while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. As I stood at the door, on a sudden, I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak. which stood about 20 yards from our house. And so soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared and nothing remained but a blasted stump. When we visited it the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I'd never beheld anything so utterly destroyed. Before this, I was not unacquainted with the more obvious laws of electricity. On this occasion, a man of great research in natural philosophy was with us, and excited by this catastrophe, he entered on the explanation of a theory which he had formed on the subject of electricity and galvanism, which was at once new and astonishing to me. All that he said threw greatly into the shade of Cornelius Agrippa, Albertus Magnus, and Paracelsus, the lords of my imagination. But by some fatality, the overthrow of these men disinclined me to pursue my accustomed studies. It seemed to me as if nothing would or could ever be known. All that had so long engaged my attention suddenly grew despicable. By one of those caprices of the mind, which we are perhaps most subject to in early youth, I at once gave up my former occupations, set down natural history and all its progeny as a deformed and abortive creation, and entertained the greatest disdain for would-be science, which could never even step within the threshold of real knowledge. In this mood of mine, I betook myself to the mathematics and the branches of study appertaining to that science as being built upon secure foundations and so worthy of my consideration. Thus, strangely are our souls constructed, and by such slight ligaments are we bound to prosperity or ruin. When I look back, it seems to me as if this almost miraculous change of inclination and will was the immediate suggestion of the guardian angel of my life, the last effort made by the spirit of preservation to avert the storm that was even then hanging in the stars and ready to envelop me. Her victory was announced by an unusual tranquility and gladness of the soul, which followed the relinquishing of my ancient and latterly tormenting studies. It was thus that I was to be taught to associate evil with their persecution and happiness with their disregard. This whole next sentence, this whole next couple of sentences are highlighted. It was a strong effort of the spirit of good, but it was ineffectual. Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction. And the note after this highlight is foreshadowing that something terrible, in brackets, things, will happen. I can't believe that terrible things will happen, and that this sentence in particular is foreshadowing those terrible things. Rather interesting choices for whoever owned this this book previously on their highlights and stuff. I definitely would have highlighted the stuff about the Philosopher's Stone and Elixir of Life, and the stuff about magicians raising ghouls. That's the stuff I would have highlighted and been like, foreshadowing. Just gonna do a quick stretch. I'd encourage you guys to do the same. Make sure that you're stretching. Don't stay in one spot too long. Make sure that you've got plenty of fluids and whatnot. I'm gonna have a sip myself as well. Okay. Chapter 3. When I had attained the age of 17, my parents resolved that I should become a student at the University of Ingolstadt. I had hitherto attended schools of Geneva, but my father thought it necessary for the completion of my education that I should be made acquainted with other customs than those of my native country. My departure was therefore fixed at an early date, but before the day resolved upon could arrive, the first misfortune of my life occurred. An omen, as it were, of my future misery. Elizabeth had caught the scarlet fever. Her illness was severe and she was in the greatest danger. During her illness, many arrangements had been urged to persuade my mother to refrain from attending upon her. She had at first yielded to our entreaties, but when she heard that the life of her favorite was menaced, she could no longer control her anxiety. She attended her sickbed. Her watchful attentions triumphed over the malignity of the distemper. Elizabeth was saved, but the consequences of this imprudence were fatal to her preserver. On the third day, my mother sickened. Her fever was accompanied by the most alarming symptoms, and the looks of her medical attendants prognosticated the worst event. On her deathbed, the fortitude and benignity of this best of women did not desert her. She joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself. "My children," she said, "my firmest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This expectation will now be the consolation of your father. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to my younger children. Alas, I regret that I am taken from you, and, happy and beloved as I have been, is it not hard to quit you all? But these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavor to resign myself cheerily to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world." She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by that most irreparable evil, the void that presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she, whom we saw every day, and whose very existence appeared as part of our own, can have departed forever, that the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days, but when the lapse of time proves the reality of the evil, then the actual bitterness or grief commences. Yet from whom has not that rude hand rent away some dear connection? And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt and must feel? The time at length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity, and the smile that plays upon the lips, although it may be deemed sacrilege, is not banished. My mother was dead, but we had still duties which we ought to perform. We must continue our course with the rest, and learn to think of ourselves fortunate, whilst one remains who the spoiler has not seized. My departure for Ingolstadt, which had been deferred by these events, was now again determined upon. I obtained from my father a respite of some weeks. It appeared to me sacrilege so soon to leave the repose, akin to death, of the house of mourning, and to rush into the thick of life. I was new to sorrow, but it did not less alarm me. I was unwilling to quit the sight of those that remained to me, and above all, I desired to see my sweet Elizabeth in some degree consoled. She indeed veiled her grief, and strove to act the comforter to us all. She looked steadily on life, and assumed its duties with courage and zeal. She devoted herself to those whom she had been taught to call uncle and cousins. Never was she so enchanting as at this time, when she recalled the sunshine of her smiles and spent them upon us. She forgot even her own regret in her endeavors to make us forget. The day of my departure at length arrived. Clairville spent the last evening with us. He had endeavored to persuade his father to permit him to accompany me and to become my fellow student, but in vain. His father was a narrow-minded trader and saw idleness and ruin in the aspirations and ambition of his son. Henry deeply felt the misfortune of being debarred from a liberal education. He said little, but when he spoke I read in his kindling eye and his animated glance a restrained but firm resolve, not to be chained to the miserable details of commerce. We sat late. We could not tear ourselves away from each other, nor persuade ourselves to say the word farewell. It was said, and we retired under a pretense of seeking repose, each fancying that the other was deceived, But when, at morning's dawn, I descended to the carriage which was to convey me away, they were all there. My father, again, bless me. Clerval, to press my hand once more. My Elizabeth, to renew her entreaties that I would write often, and to bestow the last feminine attentions on her playmate and friend. I threw myself into the chaise that was to convey me away, and indulged in the most melancholy reflections. I, who had never been surrounded by amiable companions, I, who had ever been surrounded by amiable companions, continually engaged in endeavoring to bestow mutual pleasure, was now alone. In the university whither I was going, I must form my own friends and be my own protector. My life had hitherto been remarkably secluded and domestic, and this had given me invincible repugnance to new countenances. I loved my brothers, Elizabeth and Clerval. These were old familiar faces. But I believed myself totally unfitted for the company of strangers. Such were my reflections as I commenced my journey, but as I proceeded, my spirits and hopes rose. I ardently desired the acquisition of knowledge. I had often, when at home, thought it hard to remain during my youth, cooped up in one place, and had longed to enter the world, and take my station among other human beings. Now my desires were compelled with, as it would, indeed, have been folly to repent. I had sufficient leisure for these and many other reflections during my journey to Ingolstadt, which was long and fatiguing. At length, the high white steeple of the town met my eyes. I alighted, and was conducted to my solitary apartment to spend the evening as I pleased. The next morning, I delivered my letters of introduction and paid a visit to some of the principal professors. Chance, or rather the evil influence, the angel of destruction, which asserted omnipotent sway over me from the moment I turned my reluctant steps from father's door, led me first to M. Kremp, a professor of natural philosophy. He was an uncouth man, but deeply imbued in the secrets of his science. He asked me several questions concerning my progress in the different branches of science appertaining to natural philosophy. I replied carelessly, and partly in contempt mentioned the names of my alchemists as the principal authors I had studied. The professor stated, "Have you," he said, "really spent your time in studying such nonsense?" I replied in the affirmative. "Every minute," continued M. Kremp with warmth, "every instant that you have wasted on those books is utterly and entirely lost. You've burdened your own memory with exploded systems and useless names. Good Gott! In what desert land have you lived where no one was kind enough to inform you that these fancies, which you have so greedily imbibed, are thousands of years old and musty as they are ancient? I little expected in this enlightened and scientific age to find a disciple of Albert Magnus and Paracelsus. My dear sir, you must begin your studies entirely anew." So saying, he stepped aside and wrote down a list of several books treating on natural philosophy, which he desired me to procure, and dismissed me after mentioning that in the beginning of the following week he intended to commence a course of lectures upon natural philosophy in its general relations, and that M. Waldman, a fellow professor, would lecture upon chemistry the alternate days that he omitted. I can't believe this dude just gave him a shitload of books to read in 1 week before classes have even started. Damn. Dude came to the school, and his professor was like, "Hey, how much science do you already know?" And young Frankenstein here was like, I know alchemy and magic." And the teacher was just like, "Mein Gott. You poor fool. Take these books, read something. You have 1 week." I returned home, not disappointed, for I have said that I had long considered those authors useless whom the professor reprobated. But I returned not at all the more inclined to recur to those studies in any shape. M. Kremp was a little squat man with a gruff voice and a repulsive countenance. The teacher, therefore, did not prepossess me in favor of his pursuits. In rather a too philosophical and connected a strain, perhaps, I have given an account of the conclusions I had come to concerning them in my early years. As a child, I had not been content with the results promised by the modern professors of natural science. With a confusion of ideas only to be accounted for by my extreme youth and my want of a guide on such matters, I had retrod the steps of knowledge among the paths of time, and exchanged the discoveries of recent inquirers for the dream of forgotten alchemists. Besides, I had a contempt for the users of modern natural philosophy. It was very different when the masters of the science sought immortality and power. Such views, although futile, were grand. But now the scene was changed. The ambition of the Inquirer seemed to limit itself to the annihilation of those visions on which my interest in science was chiefly founded. I was required to exchange chimeras of boundless grandeur for realities of little worth. I feel like that's a lot of the experience of folks who, especially younger folks who end up pursuing science, where they're like, oh man, wow, I'm gonna create robots and mix potions together to create cool exploding stuff. I'm gonna get us to settle on the moon, and we're gonna learn how to throw black holes around. And then you get into science courses, and a lot of them are like, yeah, no, this is how a hypothesis is structured, and if you don't do it this exact way, it's pseudoscience. Though I will admit, I did enjoy and learn a lot from a course that I took that was specifically on the structure of scientific research and how it's important to avoid a lot of things in hypotheses, right? That's the plural, right? Hypotheses. That introduce things like unfalsifiability and whatnot. Also, hey GHB, how's it going? How are you doing tonight? Yeah, that was an entire course basically built on debunking pseudosciences based on scientific methods and how they're irreplicable in a lab environment and whatnot. My voice is already getting a little worn. Let me have a little more sip. It's teabag squeezing time. Man, I can't believe it's already nearly midnight. Finish off this sip of scotch as well. Okay, that's good. I guess while I have you here, a quick aside for what I did today. So today I hung out downtown with some folks. We went to a gyudon place. I had a spicy pork belly rice bowl, as well as some chicken karage. We got a bunch of appetizers to kind of share on the table, and some grilled and pressed tuna sashimi and like salmon on rice. It was really nice. And then I got a very overpriced fruity drink. It was blueberry, strawberry, rhubarb, oolong tea. It was tasty, but it sure was $10, that drink. But yeah, we were hanging out downtown today, just in the city, and yeah, I had to throw in that rhubarb. I love rhubarb. There were actually like frozen chunks of rhubarb in the drink. It was nice. Oh my god, it's playing. Sorry, I just heard what was playing. This song haunts me. But yeah, it was actually very nice. No, this is this is Debussy, and it's a playlist just with some Chopin, Debussy, and Beethoven. But this is Gymnopédies. I think that's how you say that. From Debussy. Oh, is it Gim or Jim? I usually said Jim. Because it's French, right? One moment. Gymnopédies, pronunciation French. We're about to learn something today.
Bonjour, this is Julian, the Frenchman who makes French pronunciation videos here on YouTube, and we all looked published in 1888 and the second in 8 Gymnopédie.
Okay, so it is Gymnopédie. Let's have that one more time.
But it'd be fine in English to call them Gymnopédie.
Okay. Yeah, I figured that was it. Oh, wait. Wait, was it not Debussy this whole time? Did Flower, Sun, and Rain lie to my face? Because Flower, Sun, and Rain attributed this to Debussy. Oh my god. I'm gonna need to have some words with Suda51. I'm gonna go up to him and be like, your whole fucking diatribe that you did about Debussy was fucking wrong. This whole time I've been attributing this to him. Wow. I have some choice words for that guy. And for Flower, Sun, and Rain in general. Also, one moment. Yeah, I'm gonna be in the void for just a sec. There we go. I had to enter the pumpkin void for a moment. Just to adjust something behind the scenes. Oh, so because I got this about 5 seconds before stream start time, I just plugged it into my Fugitech, which is what we use for all of our Discord calls. It just gives everybody a little avatar that can be a PNG that has an open mouth and closed mouth. That's the program that we use. Basically, it just detects if you're in a Discord call, and if somebody is currently making noise. Very useful for having guests on, or for doing PNG tuber stuff when you're too lazy to actually run a PNG tuber program. Right, so, where was I? Right. Downtown, Honey and I met up, and I got her to get me a sketchbook, because I'm going to be starting to practice and learn some art fundamentals, so that I can apply them more to the pixel art that I've been doing. I've been doing some pixel art lately. So if I can actually learn some decent art fundamentals, then that would probably be good. I'm definitely long overdue for learning some of those, so picked up a sketchbook, and I actually got them, hold on, I got them right here. We have these supplies. This 1264 Fabriano, made in Italy. Fine tooth, heavy feel, easy erase, acid-free sketchbook. This was only $12. It's big and nice. I'm gonna be using this as my my exercise book. Ah, here's some bonus literature. The pad you're holding is recommended for all sketching techniques. The Fabriano 1264 sketching pad features a buff paper with fine texture whose generous hand gives the feeling of a much heavier paper. It is the perfect traveling companion as it allows for spontaneous sketching endeavors that will capture any moments and thoughts and turn them into memories. Created in 1264, Fabriano is the oldest European paper mill. It is located in the town of Fabriano, 45 minutes away from Ancona, a treasured seashore resort on the Adriatic Sea. Not only did the mill invent the watermark, still used in paper and banknotes today, and surface sizing, dear to all watercolorists, the town was also awarded the UNESCO Creative Classification in 2013. Join Leonardo and Raffaello in proudly using Fabriano papers. Yep, that's right. From Leonardo da Vinci to Bearman. But other than the sketchbook itself, I have these Faber-Castell graphite sketch pencils. We've got 8 pieces in various sizes, from 2H to 6B. And this also comes, of course, with a nice pencil sharpener and an eraser for erasing specifically graphite pencils, it seems. Looks like, yeah, it's a PVC eraser. And then other than those pencils, I've got these blending stumps, which are also similar to erasers. They're just kind of these little rolled paper things that are for blending graphite. And then there's the gummy eraser, the soft eraser. I guess it's a kneadable eraser. That comes with these as well. But apparently neither of these erasers leave any eraser dust. So yeah, I got 2 different erasers, a bunch of blending stumps, graphite, and a sketchbook, so that I can draw some spheres. And put lighting on them, and then start drawing some vases in perspective, and whatnot. Perhaps some fruit? Some bowls of fruit? And various other things. Apples in bowls. My, how bold. How bold those apples are. But yeah, so that was another thing that we did today. And after all that, we ended the night by heading over to a used bookstore. And I picked up a couple things. I got an omnibus, a couple omnibuses actually. They were a bunch of mixed themed stories. Each one was about $10. One of them is fantasy stories. I think it's called just the Big Book of Modern Fantasy Literature. And I look on the back, and it includes, in big bold text, it says, includes dragons, 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 swords and sorcery. And I was like, all right, hell yeah, I could read some fantasy schlock. But the other one was just adventure stories. So like a bunch of like 50s pulp fiction, including things going as far back as like the original text for Tarzan the Terrible and like Conan the Barbarian stories and whatnot. So those were like two massive like dictionary-sized omnibuses that I got. I also got a copy of Larry Niven's Ringworld, which I had previously only ever taken out from a library, so I'm glad to actually have a copy of it now. And the last one that I picked up is actually a book that's kind of special to me, especially because of a lot of recent things in Canada involving residential schools and whatnot, if anybody knows about that fucked up situation. But I got Kiss of the Fur Queen from Thompson Highway, and the copy I got was actually signed by Thompson Highway. I managed to find a signed copy of that book for only $10. And when Honey and I were there in the bookstore, she pointed it out. She was like, "Look, this copy says it's signed." It was the hard copy that was a bit more pricey. But I opened it up and I was like, holy shit, it is signed. And I saw the person's name. And I looked at Honey and I said, I hope this person's dead. Because I would not give away a signed copy of this book were I still alive. And yeah, then I headed home, got my PNG tuber together. And started reading you guys some Frankenstein. Yeah. So on that note, let us continue. And where was I? Right. Such were my reflections during the first 2 or 3 days of my residence at Ingolstadt, which were chiefly spent in becoming acquainted with the localities and the principal residents in my new abode. But as the ensuing week commenced, I thought of the information which M. Kremp had given me concerning the lectures. And although I could not consent to go and hear that little conceited fellow deliver sentences out of a pulpit, I recollected that he had said of M. Waldman, whom I had never seen, as he had hitherto been out of town. Partly from curiosity, and partly from idleness, I went into the lecturing room, which M. Waldman entered shortly after. This professor was very unlike his colleague. He appeared about 50 years of age, but with an aspect expressive of the greatest benevolence. A few gray hairs covered his temples, but those at the back of his head were nearly black. His person was short but remarkably erect, and his voice the sweetest I had ever heard. He began his lecture by a recapitulation. He He began his lecture by a recapitulation of the history of chemistry and the various improvements made by different men of learning, pronouncing with fervor the names of the most distinguished discoverers. He then took a cursory view of the present state of science and explained many of its elementary terms. After having made a few preparatory experiments, he concluded with a panegyric upon modern chemistry, the terms of which I shall never forget. "The ancient teachers of science," said he, "promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted and that the elixir of life is a chimera. But these philosophers, whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They've discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They could command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows." Such were the professor's words. Rather, let me say such the words of the fate encountered to destroy me. As he went on, I felt as if my soul were grappling with a palpable enemy. One by one, the various keys were touched which formed the mechanism of my being. Chord after chord was sounded, and soon my mind was filled with one thought, one conception, one purpose. "So much has been done," exclaimed the soul of Frankenstein. "More, far more will I achieve. Treading in the steps already marked, I will pioneer a new way, explore unknown powers, and unfold to the world the deepest mysteries of creation." I closed not my eyes that night. My internal being was in a state of insurrection and turmoil. I felt that order would thence arise, but I had no power to produce it. By degrees, after the morning's dawn, sleep came. I awoke, and my yesternight's thoughts were as a dream. There only remained a resolution to return to my ancient studies and to devote myself to a science for which I believed myself to possess a natural talent. On the same day I paid Mr. Waldman a visit. His manners in private were even more mild and attractive than in public, for there was a certain dignity in his mien during his lecture, which in his own house was replaced by the greatest affability and kindness. I gave him pretty nearly the same account of my former pursuits as I had given to his fellow professor. He heard with attention the little narration concerning my studies, and smiled at the names of Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus, but without the contempt that M. Krempe had exhibited. He said that these were men to whose indefatigable zeal modern philosophers were indebted for most of the foundations of their knowledge. They had left to us as an easier task to give new names and arrange in connected classifications the facts which they had, in great degree, been instruments of bringing to light. The labors of men of genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning to solid advantage of mankind. I listened to his statement, which was delivered without any presumption or affectation, and then added that his lecture had removed any prejudices against modern chemists. I expressed myself in measured terms, with the modesty and deference due from a youth to his instructor, without letting escape, inexperience in life would have made me ashamed, any of the enthusiasm which stimulated my intended labors. I requested his advice concerning the books I ought to procure. "I'm happy," said M. Waldman, "to have gained a disciple, and if your application equals your ability, I have no doubt of your success. Chemistry is that branch of natural philosophy in which the greatest improvements have been and may be made. It is on that account that I have made it my particular study, but at the same time I have not neglected the other branches of science. A man would make but a very sorry chemist if he attended to that department of human knowledge alone. If your wish is to become really a man of science and not merely a petty experimentalist, I should advise you to apply to every branch of natural philosophy, including mathematics." He then took me into his laboratory and explained to me the uses of his various machines, instructing me as to what I ought to procure and promising me the use of his own when I should have advanced far enough in the science not to derange their mechanism. He also gave me the list of books which I had requested, and I took my leave. Thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. Shockingly, the previous owner of the book has not highlighted the phrase, "It decided my future destiny," and written foreshadowing underneath it. But that's it for Chapter 3. Now I'm going to actually be right back real quick, since that's the 2-hour mark. I actually need to refill my water real quick. So I'd recommend that you guys do the same. Make sure to get some fluids in you. Get your hydration ready, and I will be right back as soon as I refill my water and have a little stretch. Alright, I'm back. And welcome back once again into my parlor. How are you all doing? I hope that everybody's gotten themselves a drink and made themselves cozy once again after maybe a little stretch. Oh, there's the dragon flying off again. Interesting choice for this background. I want to try and grab a different background for each reading stream and just like pretend it's a different room of my house. It's just hard to find some of these that are seamless and of greater than 4 hours in length. Some of them are only an hour, and they have like either a super hard cut, or they've got like ads for other videos in the end that would completely destroy the immersion. So just finding a nice setting each time is the goal here. But I'm glad that this is a genre of video. This feels almost like it's entirely for two purposes. One is to like have on in the background of a Halloween party or whatever. And the other is just for streamers to do like what I'm doing right now. Okay. So, getting back into Frankenstein, I'm using a torn-out page of note paper from a small notepad as my bookmark right now, because my main bookmark is currently in use in the actual book that I'm reading right now. Rather, that is the book that I'm reading to myself every morning over my coffee. I say bookmark, but my bookmark is a mountain from Magic the Gathering. It's just a mountain card. Actually, when is this card? When was this card printed? This particular mountain, because it's an old mountain. Currently sitting in my Dracula. Oh wow, it's so old that it doesn't even have the date printed on it for copyright. It doesn't even have a symbol on it for the set. It might mean it's like an alpha or beta land. No, it's probably at least beta, because it's got a white border, so it's a reprint. Oh, this is funny. I'm with my mountain bookmark here. It's bookmarked into exactly page 100 of this version of the annotated Norton Critical Edition of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Also, yeah, I haven't, I generally haven't used dedicated bookmarks. I remember that, sometimes they would come with book orders when ordering from Scholastic. They would always be that one specific type of bookmark that had, like, the built-in flap. I found that those always ended up tearing around the flap, so I didn't end up using them too much. And then I got a holographic bookmark. But the problem with that one, it was an image of an owl on it, and when you tilted it side to side, the image changed to look like the owl was flapping. It was a really big holographic bookmark, and it was thick. And what ended up happening to it is, as time went on, it ended up bending. It was practically a C shape. So it obviously lost its use as a bookmark. once it curled so much. And in a lot of instances, a lot of the books that I'll grab, especially hardcovers, well, exclusively hardcovers, will have the little built-in bookmark ribbon, like the editions that I have of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or Treasure Island, or The Adventures and Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, etc. All have that built-in ribbon bookmark. But yeah, other than that, I've just been using cards. Occasionally I'll use a business card. But yeah, I've been using that one mountain card for a long time now, for many years. Oh shit, a metal bookmark, that's fucking heavy duty. Yeah, I feel like holographic bird bookmarks are pretty ubiquitous for some reason. There's, okay, hold on. Paperback Paradise. These guys have some great bookmarks. Let's see. Oh man, I love these. Let me just grab this image here. Sorry for the immersion break. Need to remember this page? Forget about it. I'll have my boys look after your spot. Hey, yo, I'm in the freaking mafia. They just have a bunch of bookmarks like that. Then there's, if someone tries to move your bookmark, I will destroy them. Thank you, horse. World's worst reader. Dumb. No good. Oh, here's a saucy one. It's okay to make out with a book if you love it. There we go, get that back in full screen. but yeah, they do a lot of funny bookmarks and whatchamacallits. They do like parody book covers for a lot of like schlock fiction. It's Paperback Paradise is the account in the store. Ah, the memories. I am taken back. Taken back to another era. Speaking of being taken back to another era, let us once again return to 1818 so that we can once again return to 17 blankety blank. And continue reading some Frankenstein. Speaking of Frankenstein, I really want to do a movie night this month for both the Vincent Price version of The Raven and Young Frankenstein. Is that the bookmarks that your students does? That's actually very pretty. Dang. This fancy. Opulent, even. Okay. Oh, to make me a bookmark? I'll try to think about what I would want on a bookmark then. Yeah, I'll have to think that one over. There's that dragon flapping by again. Anyway. Chapter 4. From this day, natural philosophy, and particularly chemistry in the most comprehensive sense of the term, became nearly my sole occupation. I read with ardor those works, so full of genius and discrimination, which modern enquiries have written on these subjects. I attended the lectures and cultivated the acquaintance of the men of science of the university, and I even found in M. Krempe a great deal of sound sense and real information combined. It is true, with a repulsive physiognomy and manners, but not on that account the less valuable. In M. Waldman I found a true friend. His gentleness was never tinged by dogmatism, and his instructions were given with an air of frankness and good nature that banished every idea of pedantry. In 1,000 ways he smoothed for me the path of knowledge and made the most abstruse inquiries clear and facile to my apprehension. My application was at first fluctuating and uncertain. It gained strength as I proceeded, and soon became so ardent and eager that the stars often disappeared in the light of morning whilst I was yet engaged in my laboratory. As I applied so closely, it may be easily conceived that my progress was rapid. My ardor was indeed the astonishment of the students, and my proficiency that of the masters. Professor Krempe often asked me with a sly smile how Cornelius Agrippa went on, whilst Emma Waldman expressed the most heartfelt exultation in my progress. 2 years passed in this manner, during which I paid no visit to Geneva, but was engaged heart and soul in the pursuit of some discoveries which I had hoped to make. Now this entire next sentence is highlighted. This entire next couple of sentences. None but those who have experienced them can conceive of the enticements of science. In other studies you go as far as others have gone before you, and there is nothing more to know. But in a scientific pursuit there is continual food for discovery and wonder. Highlighter ends. I like science. Highlight that. A mind of moderate capacity which closely pursued one study must infallibly arrive at great proficiency in that study, and I, who continually sought the attainment of one object of pursuit, was solely wrapped up in this, improved so rapidly that at the end of 2 years I made some discoveries in the improvement of some chemical instruments which procured me great esteem and admiration at the university. Yeah, foreshadowing. Also, I like how Frankenstein here is basically like, I invented cool new beakers. Everybody loved me for my beakers. When I had arrived at this point and had become as well acquainted with the theory and practice of natural philosophy as depended on the lessons of any of the professors at Ingolstadt, my residence there being no longer conducive to my improvements, I thought of returning to my friends in my native town when an incident happened that protracted my stay. One of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endued with life. Whence I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered a mystery. I always read ever as never in sentences that flow like that. So once again, Whence, I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question and one which has ever been considered a mystery, yet with how many things are we upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries. I revolved these circumstances in my mind, and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology. Unless I had been animated by an almost supernatural enthusiasm, my application to this study would have been irksome and almost intolerable. To examine the causes of life, we must first have recourse to death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. In my education, my father had taken the greatest precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. I do not even remember to have trembled at a tale of superstition or to have feared the apparition of spirit. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which, from being the seat of beauty and strength, had become food for the worm. Now I was led to examine the cause and progress of this decay, and forced to spend days and nights in vaults and charnel houses. My attention was fixed upon every object, the most insupportable to the delicacy of the human feelings. I saw how the fine form of man was degraded and wasted. I beheld the corruption of death succeed to the blooming cheek of life. I saw how the worm inherited the wonders of the eye and brain. I paused, examining and analyzing all of the minutiae of causation, and exemplified in the change from life to death, from death to life. Until the midst of this darkness, a sudden light broke in upon me. A light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that while I became dizzy with the immensity of the prospect which it had illustrated, I was surprised that among so many men of genius who had directed their inquiries towards the same science, that I alone should be reserved to discover so astonishing a secret. Remember, I'm not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of the discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. The astonishment which I had first experienced on this discovery soon gave place to delight and rapture. After so much time spent in painful labor, to arrive at once at the summit of my desires was the most gratifying consummation of my toils. But this discovery was so great and overwhelming that all the steps by which I had been progressively led to it were obliterated, and I beheld only the result. Wow, that seems like exactly what you don't want to happen in science. Like, oh shit, my experiment worked, but it kind of destroyed the entire process through which that, I could prove that it worked. That is, what they refer to in the scientific community as a huge bummer, man. What had been the study and desire of the wisest men since the creation of the world was now within my grasp. Not that, like a magic scene, it had all opened upon me at once. The information I had obtained was of a nature rather to direct my endeavors, so soon as I should point them towards the object of my search, than to exhibit that object already accomplished. I was like the Arabian who had been buried with the dead, and found a passage to life aided only by one glimmering and seemingly ineffectual light. So this is, of course, a reference to Sinbad the Sailor's fourth voyage in the 1001 Nights, which is in the footnotes there. Thank you, footnote. I've actually read 1001 Nights. That's the reason that I read that one was because I read Inkheart, and there's a section in Inkheart. That book and that series was one that I liked a lot. Inkheart from Cornelia Funke. But there's a character in that series who reads so well that the characters in the books literally come to life. And there's a section where the guy's reading Arabian Nights, but he's being super careful not to read any of the, like, crazy villains or evil jinns into life. So instead he just ends up reading like a little servant boy who is only mentioned in like one single sentence out of the book. But yeah, Inkheart is definitely a great series if you want to cultivate a love of reading, because it's a book about books. And yeah, Cornelia Funke is a wonderful author. She also did The Thief Lord, I believe. And was it just called Dragon Rider? Another one that she did. But I think she was definitely the one who was greatly responsible. It's a really hard one. It's between her and Neil Gaiman, who would have been like the most responsible for giving me my love of reading as a kid. But yeah, thanks to that, I actually did read 1001 Nights, and I think it's really funny, despite how, of course, ancient those tales are, and how they're much like a lot of fairy tales based on older stories. How it really gives a modern wraparound. The idea being that it's Sherazade, who is a concubine who's set to be executed, who her whole thing is, oh, in order to stall my execution, I'm gonna tell the Sultan 1,000 tales and enthrall him with my tales so that I can preserve my life. And that's like the wraparound story, and then all of these stories in the book are the actual like tales that she was telling the Sultan. Which kind of harkens to a lot of modern compilation fiction where they usually have a wraparound story. Things like, if you've seen like horror compilation movies like Creepshow and whatnot, they'll usually have like the wraparound of the kid reading the comic book and everything is the stories within his comic book and whatnot. So for something that seems like so modern and out of movies, it actually has its origin in things like that, having a kind of wraparound plot in order to deliver a bunch of individual other tales. That was a hell of a tangent. It's almost like me inviting you into my parlor for this stream is the wraparound for reading these spooky stories to you. I honestly, even past the Halloween season, I might try to do more reading streams because I am enjoying this. But yeah, that's definitely a good one that I would super recommend to anybody who's a fan of books. Is Inkheart. Also, welcome in, Gray. Yeah, that's why I'm going on so many tangents, so that it takes me 1001 nights to finish reading Frankenstein. And then my readers suspiciously go missing one by one. I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. Well, I gotta stay my execution somehow. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. I will not lead you on unguarded and ardent, as I then was, to your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge. Also, there's highlighter on how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge. There's, once again, hearkening back to the modern Prometheus. Prometheus hands us the fire. Ooh, ow, fire hot. And then Prometheus is like, okay, yeah, but it's useful. And then the gods are like, don't give them useful shit. Man! We're sending you to the timeout rock. How dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. When I found so astonishing a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the matter in which I should employ it. Although I possessed the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it, with all its intricacies of fibers, muscles, and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labor. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself, or one of simpler organization, but my imagination was too much exalted by my first success to permit me to doubt of my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. The ability to give life to an animal... the materials at present within my command hardly appeared adequate to so arduous an undertaking. But I doubted not that I should ultimately succeed. I prepared myself for a multitude of reverses. My operations might be incessantly baffled, and at last my work be imperfect. Yet, when I considered the improvement which every day takes place in science and mechanics, I was encouraged to hope my present attempts would at least lay the foundations of future success. Nor could I consider the magnitude and complexity of my plan as an argument of its impracticality. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being. As the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed, I resolved, contrary to my first intention, to make the being of a gigantic stature. That is to say, about 8 feet in height, and proportionably large. After having formed this determination, and having spent some months in successfully collecting and arranging my materials, I began. No one can conceive the variety of feelings which bore me onwards, like a hurricane in the first enthusiasm of success. Life and death appeared to me in ideal bounds, which I should break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might, in process of time, although I found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. These thoughts supported my spirits, while I pursued my undertaking with unremitting ardor. My cheek had grown pale with study, and my person had become emaciated with confinement. Me after every Cleave Together update. Sometimes, on the very brink of certainty, I failed, yet I still clung to the hope which the next day or the next hour might realize. One secret which I alone possessed was the hope to which I had dedicated myself, and the moon gazed on my midnight labors, while the unrelaxed and breathless eagerness I pursued nature to her hiding places. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal to animate the lifeless clay? My limbs now tremble, and my eyes swim with the remembrance. Then a restless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward. I seemed to have lost all soul or sensation but for this one pursuit. It was indeed but a passing trance. that only made me feel with renewed acuteness so soon as the unnatural stimulus ceasing to operate. I had returned to my old habits. I collected bones from carnal houses and disturbed with profane fingers the tremendous secrets of the human frame. In a solitary chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house, and separated from all other apartments by a gallery and staircase, I kept my workshop of filthy creation. My eyeballs were starting from their sockets and attending to the details for my employment. The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials, and often did my human nature turn with loathing from my occupation, whilst still I urged on by an eagerness which perpetually increased, brought my work near to conclusion. The summer months passed while I thus engaged heart and soul in one pursuit. It was a most beautiful season. Never did the fields bestow a more plentiful harvest, or the vines yield a more luxuriant vintage. But my eyes were insensible to the charms of nature, and the same feelings which made me neglect the scenes around me caused me also to forget those friends who were so many miles absent, and whom I had not seen for so long a time. I knew my silence disquieted them, and I well remembered the words of my father. I know that while you're pleased with yourself, you think of us with affection, and we shall hear regularly from you. You must pardon me if I regard any interruption in your correspondence as proof that your other duties are equally neglected. Sorry, that was his dad speaking. That last part. Let me try that again. I knew my silence disquieted them, and I well remembered the words of my father. I know that you are pleased with yourself. You will think of us with affection, and we will hear regularly from you. You must pardon me if I regard any interruption in your correspondence as proof that your other duties are equally neglected. I knew well, therefore, that would be my father's feelings, but I could not tear my thoughts from my employment, loathsome in itself, but which had taken an irresistible hold of my imagination. I wished, as it were, to procrastinate all that related to my feelings of affection until the great object, which swallowed up every habit of my nature, should be completed. Me every day working on Cleave Together. I then thought that my father would be unjust if he ascribed my neglect to vice or faultiness on my part. But I am now convinced that he was justified in conceiving that I should not be altogether free from blame. A human being in perfection ought always to preserve a calm and peaceful mind, and never to allow passion or transitory desire to disturb his tranquility. I do not think that the pursuit of knowledge is an exception to this rule. The study to which you apply yourself has a tendency to weaken your affections and destroy your taste for those simple pleasures in which no alloy can possibly mix. Then that study is certainly unlawful, that is to say, not befitting the human mind. If this rule were always observed, if no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the tranquility of his domestic affections, Greece had not been enslaved, Caesar would have spared his country, America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru had not been destroyed. But I forget that I am moralizing in the most interesting part of my tale, and your looks remind me to proceed. My father made no reproach in his letters, and only took notice of my silence by inquiring into my occupations more particularly than before. Winter, spring, summer passed away during my labors, but I did not watch the blossom or the expanding leaves, sights which before always yielded me supreme delight. So deeply was I engrossed in my occupation. The leaves of that year had withered before my work drew to a close, and now every day showed me more plainly how well I had succeeded. But my enthusiasm was checked by my anxiety, and I appeared rather like one doomed by slavery to toil in the mines, or any other unwholesome trade than an artist occupied by his favorite employment. Every night I was oppressed by a slow fever, and I became nervous to a most painful degree. The fall of a leaf startled me, and I shunned my fellow creatures as if I had been guilty to some crime. Sometimes I grew alarmed at the wreck I perceived that I had become, me every day developing Cleave Together. The energy of my purpose alone sustained me. My labors would soon end, and I believed that exercise and amusement would then drive away incipient disease. And I promised myself both of these when my creation should be complete. That's the end of chapter 4. So aside from that, that obvious connection, I had a funny thought. Anytime I stutter on a word, I'm gonna pretend that I'm doing the Inkheart thing, where, oh no, I can't read it too good, otherwise I'm gonna summon something out of a book. Or other various things that happen in that series that I won't spoil, so that folks out there can read it on their own. Well, I'll just use that as an excuse for if I ever stutter. I'm just trying to make sure that Victor Frankenstein doesn't appear in my basement. He will be so confused. He will see the TV screen and have a heart attack instantly. And then I'll have a body on my hands. And what am I gonna do other than reanimate it? That would only seem appropriate. I'm going to, once again, wet my whistle a bit before we continue. And as always, I'd encourage you guys to stretch, have yourselves a little break, grab some fluids, have some snacks. I hope that reading has helped provide everybody with an environment that is also conducive to working and whatnot. I know that a lot of folks like to lurk and work on their own projects while they listen, and I highly encourage that. I would be very proud to know that any of my streams have induced a good workflow in anybody. As I often also use folks' streams to work on my various endeavors between game development and writing, and more recently art, I suppose. Okay, now, let's continue. Oh, you're doing NaNoWriMo this month? Oh yeah, that's right, it is October, isn't it? That happens. I've never actually successfully... Oh, November, okay. I've never actually successfully completed one, though I have a few friends who participate. Chapter 5. It was on a dreary night of November. Uh-oh. The book hurt us. I'm spooked. November mentioned. Also, yeah, I guess the no in Nano, I actually completely forget what the long form of it is. I guess the no is for November, perhaps. I could be wrong. Novel. Okay. Never mind. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning, the rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe? Or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? Highlighted, his limbs were in proportion, not highlighted, and I had selected his highlighted features as beautiful, not highlighted. Beautiful, great God! Highlighted. His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of pearly whiteness. but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. End highlight. I don't know why those two little clusters of words in this whole paragraph were not important to highlight, but this is very, very purposeful highlighting. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now I had finished. The beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length, lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of flannel. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead, my teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed, when by the dim yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if they may be thus called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He may have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Oh, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy again endured with animation could not be so hideous as that wretch. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and the joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of every artery. At others, I nearly sank to the ground through the languor and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long, space were now become hell to me. Yeah, Dante mentioned. And the change was so rapid, the overthrow so complete. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned, and discovered to my sleepless and aching eyes the church of Ingolstadt, its white steeple and clock, which indicated the 6th hour. The porter opened the gates of the court, which had that night been my asylum, and I issued into the streets, pacing them with quick steps, as if I sought to avoid the wretch whom I'd feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare return to the apartment which I inhabited, but felt impelled to hurry on, although drenched by the rain which poured from a black and comfortless sky. Now, this is something that is a major difference between the text of the original Frankenstein and a lot of the lore that kind of came out of this. The apocrypha to Frankenstein, as it were, that was established in things like the movies mainly. When you think of Frankenstein, because of the era that it came out in, the 1930s. That was an era where a lot of kind of ghosts and monsters and whatnot were being phased out for scary entities of science. Because you had coming revolutions of technologies, you had anxieties about impending war and whatnot. And so the figure of Victor Frankenstein was kind of propelled into a slightly then more modern setting. Instead of the animation of the corpses being as vague as they were in this book, you get your science lab slabs, your electrical storms, bringing them back to life and whatnot. Whereas you'll see that in this, it is actually very vague as to the actual method of reanimation. And interestingly enough, in the movie, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, kind of the Frankenstein counterpart movie to the Bram Stoker's Dracula movie. What a mixed bag those movies were. They kind of stick more to the book, where rather than a reanimation on a slab with a thunderbolt from the sky, they're just kind of mucking about in a puddle of embryonic fluid. Which is a lot more accurate to the source, as you'll see. Movie The Bride. The recentish one? Oh, the one with Sting. Okay, so not the recentish one. I was like, I know of a few movies called The Bride. With Sting. I don't think so, no. But I assume that is also a Frankenstein adaptation. Or an inspired by Frankenstein kind of, yeah, thing. Adaptation in a loose sense. I haven't actually seen that one. But I mean, the fact that Sting is in it piques my interest for potential camp value. Yeah, I can imagine. But I remember Sting's incredible performance in David Lynch's Dune. So if he's hamming it as I presume he'd be playing the Victor Frankenstein-esque character in a similar fashion, picking all that scenery out of his teeth, then that's at least bound to be an enjoyable time. Okay, where were we? Ah, here we are. I continued walking in this manner for some time, endeavoring by bodily exercise to ease the load that weighed upon my mind. Reanimated a corpse who tried to strangle me. He's out there. Better go on a light morning stroll. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear, and I hurried on with irregular steps, not daring to look about me. Like one on a lonesome road who doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. From Coleridge's Ancient Mariner. They really did like the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Continuing thus, I came at length to opposite the inn at which the various diligences and carriages usually stopped. Here I paused. I knew not why, but I remained some minutes with my eyes fixed on a coach that was coming towards me from the other end of the street. Did you know that there's like 100 different styles and sizes of coaches, and they all have their own friggin' names? If you've ever read The Adventures and Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, in that alone, there's like dozens of different carriages that they refer to by name every time. It's like, and then the Brougham pulled up, etc. As it drew nearer, I observed that it was the Swiss diligence. It stopped just where I was standing, and on the door being opened, I perceived Henry Clerval, who, on seeing me, instantly sprung out. "My dear Frankenstein!" exclaimed he. "How glad I am to see you! How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my alighting!" Nothing could equal my delight on seeing Clerval. His presence brought back to my thoughts my father, Elizabeth, and all those scenes of home so dear to my recollection. I grasped his hand and in a moment forgot my horror and misfortune. I felt suddenly and for the first time during many months calm and serene joy. I welcomed my friend, therefore, in the most cordial manner, and we walked towards my college. Clerval continued talking for some time about our mutual friends and his own good fortune in being permitted to come to Ingolstadt. "You may easily believe," said he, "how great was the difficulty to persuade my father that all necessary knowledge was not comprised in the noble art of bookkeeping, and indeed I believe I left him incredulous to the last, for his constant answer to the unwearied entreaties was the same as that to the Dutch schoolmaster and the vicar of Wakefield. I have 10,000 florins a year without Greek, I eat heartily without Greek, but his affection for me at length overcame his dislike of learning, and he has permitted me to undertake a voyage of discovery to the land of knowledge. It gives me the greatest delight to see you, but tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth." "Very well, they're very happy, only a little uneasy that they hear from you so seldom. By the by, I mean to lecture you a little upon their account myself, but, my dear Frankenstein," continued he, stopping short and gazing full in my face, "I did not before remark how very ill you appear. So thin and pale, you look as if you've been watching for several nights." "You've guessed right. I've lately been so deeply engaged in one occupation that I've not allowed myself sufficient rest, as you see. But I sincerely hope, that all these employments are now at an end, and that I am at length free." I trembled excessively. I could not endure to think of, and far less to allude to, the occurrences of the preceding night. I walked with a quick pace, and we soon arrived at my college. I then reflected, and the thought made me shiver, that the creature whom I had left in my apartment might still be there alive and walking about. I dreaded to behold this monster, but I feared still more that Henry should see him. Entreating him, therefore, to remain a few minutes at the bottom of the stairs, I darted upwards towards my room. My hand was already on the lock of the door before I recollected myself. I then paused, and a cold shivering came over me. I threw the door forcibly open, as children are accustomed to do when they expect a spectre to stand in waiting for them on the other side. But nothing appeared. I stepped fearfully in. The apartment was empty, and my bedroom was also freed from its hideous guest. I could hardly believe that so great a good fortune could have befallen me. I don't know about that one, Chief. But when I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands for joy and ran down to Clerval. Haha, not my problem anymore. We ascended into my room, and the servant presently brought breakfast, but I was unable to contain myself. It was not joy only that possessed me. I felt my flesh tingle with excess of sensitiveness, and my pulse beat rapidly. I was unable to remain for a single instant in the same place. I jumped over to the chairs, clapped my hands, and laughed aloud. Clerval at first attributed my unusual spirits to joy on his arrival, but when he observed me more attentively, he saw a wildness in my eyes for which he could not account, and my loud, unrestrained, heartless laughter frightened and astonished him. "But, my dear Victor," cried he, "what for God's sake is the matter? Do not laugh in that manner. How ill you are! What is the cause of all this?" "Do not ask me," cried I, putting my hands before my eyes, for I thought I saw the dreaded spectre glide into the room. "He can tell. Oh, save me. Save me!" I imagined that monster seized me. I struggled furiously and fell down in a fit. Poor Clerval. What must have been his feelings? A meeting which he anticipated with such joy so strangely turned to bitterness. But I was not the witness of his grief, for I was lifeless and did not recover my senses for a long, long time. This was the commencement of a nervous fever which confined me for several months. During all that time, Henry was my only nurse. I afterwards learned that, knowing my father's advanced age and unfitness for so long a journey and how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth, he spared them this grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. He knew that I could not have a more kind and attentive nurse than himself, and, firm in the hope he felt of my recovery, he did not doubt that instead of doing harm, he performed the kindest action that he could towards them. Yeah, this is another common thing in this era of fiction. Was the main character or a side character experiences such a shock that they end up being put into a bad disposition for many a week or month, and having to be nursed by their friend or partner until they recover from their brain fever. The same thing happened to Jonathan Harker in Dracula, for instance. But I was in reality very ill, and surely nothing but the unbounded and unremitting attentions of my friend could have restored me to life. Oh, yeah. The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Doubtless my words surprised Henry. He had first believed them to be the wanderings of my disturbed imagination, but the pertinacity with which I continually recurred to the same subject persuaded him that my disorder indeed owed its origin to some uncommon and terrible event. By very slow degrees, and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my friend, I recovered. I remembered the first time I became capable of observing outwards with any kind of pleasure. I perceived that the fallen leaves had disappeared and that young buds were shooting forth from the trees that shaded my window. It was a divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my convalescence. I felt also sentiments of joy and affection revive in my bosom. My gloom disappeared, and in a short time I became as cheerful as before I was attacked by the fatal passion. "Dearest Clerval," exclaimed I, "how kind, how very good you are to me. This whole winter, instead of being spent in study as you promised yourself, you've been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? I feel the greatest remorse for the disappointment of which I have been the occasion, but you will forgive me. You will repay me entirely if you do not discompose yourself, but get well as fast as you can. And since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on one subject, may I not?" I trembled. One subject? What could it be? but you allude to an object on whom I dared not even think. Compose yourself, said Clerval, who observed my change of color. I will not mention it if it agitates you, but your father and cousin would be very happy if they received a letter from you in your own handwriting. They hardly know how ill you've been and are uneasy at your long silence. Is that all, my dear Henry? Oh, how could you suppose that my first thought would not fly towards those dear, dear friends who I love and are so deserving of my love? If this is your present temper, my friend, you will perhaps be glad to see a letter that has been lying here some days for you. It is from your cousin, I believe. That is the end of chapter 5. He's like, check it out, letter from your cousin. Boom, next chapter. Efficient. Because that means they can structure the next chapter like a letter. Okay. Chapter 6. Clerval then put the following letter into my hands. It was from my own Elizabeth. My dearest cousin, you've been ill, very ill, and even the constant letters of dear kind Henry are not sufficient to reassure me on your account. You're forbidden to write, to hold a pen, yet one word from you, dear Victor, is necessary to calm our apprehensions. For a long time I've thought that each post would bring this line, and my persuasions have restrained my uncle from undertaking a journey to Ingolstadt. I've prevented his encountering the inconveniences and perhaps dangers of so long a journey, yet how often I've regretted not being able to perform it myself. I figure to myself that the task of attending on your sickbed has devolved on some mercenary old nurse, who could never guess your wishes nor minister to them with care and affection of your poor cousin. Yet that is over now. Clerval writes that indeed you are getting better. I eagerly hope that you will confirm this intelligence soon in your own handwriting. Get well and return to us. You'll find a happy, cheerful home and friends who love you dearly. Your father's health is vigorous, and he asks but to see you. But to be assured that you are well, and not a care will ever cloud his benevolent countenance. Oh, how pleased you would be to remark the improvement of our Ernest. He's now 16 and full of activity and spirit. He's desirous to be a true Swiss and to enter into foreign service, but we cannot part with him, at least until his elder brother returns to us. My uncle is not pleased with the idea of a military career in a distant country, but Ernest never had your powers of application. He looks upon study as an odious fetter. His time is spent in the open air, climbing the hills or rowing on the lake. I fear that he will become an idler unless we yield the point and permit him to enter on the profession which he has selected. Little alteration except the growth of our dear children has taken place since you left us. The blue lake, the snow-clad mountains, they never change, and I think our placid home and our contented hearts are regulated by the same immutable laws. My trifling occupations take up my time and amuse me, and I'm rewarded for any exertions by seeing none but happy, kind faces around me. Since you left us, but one change has taken place in our little household. Do you remember on what occasions Justine Moritz entered our family? Probably you do not. I'll relate her history, therefore, in a few words. How convenient to us, the readers. Madame Moritz, her mother, was a widow with 4 children, of whom Justine was the third. This girl had always been the favorite of her father, but through a strange perversity her mother could not endure her, and after the death of M. Moritz, treated her very ill. My aunt observed this, and when Justine was 12 years of age, prevailed on her mother to allow her to live at our house. The republican institutions of our country have produced simpler and happier manners than those which prevail in the great monarchies that surround it. Hence there is less distinction between the several classes of its inhabitants, and the lower orders, being neither so poor nor so despised, their manners are more refined and moral. A servant in Geneva does not mean the same thing as a servant in France and England. Justine, thus received in our family, learned the duties of a servant, a condition which in our fortunate country does not include the idea of ignorance and a sacrifice of dignity of a human being. Justine, you may remember, was a great favorite of yours, and I recollect you once remarked that if you were in ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it, for the same reason that Ariosto gives concerning, blah, 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 blah. Take two. Justine, you may remember, was a great favorite of yours, and I recollect you once remarked that if you were in an ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it, for the same reason that Ariosto gives concerning the beauty of Angelica, which is one of the chief heroines of Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, according to the footnotes. She looked so frank-hearted and happy. My aunt conceived a great attachment for her, by which she was induced to give her an education superior to that which she had first intended. This benefit was fully repaid. Justine was the most grateful little creature in the world. I do not mean that she made any professions. I never once heard one pass her lips, but you could see by her eyes that she almost adored her protectress. Although her disposition was gay and in many respects inconsiderate, she paid the greatest attention to every gesture of my aunt. She thought her the model of all excellence and endeavored to imitate her phraseology and manners, so that even now she often reminds me of her. When my dearest aunt died, everyone was much too occupied in their own grief to notice poor Justine, who had attended her illness with the most anxious affection. Poor Justine was very ill, but other trials were reserved for her. One by one, her brothers and sister died, and her mother, with the exception of her neglected daughter, was left childless. The conscience of the woman was troubled. She began to think that the deaths of her favorites were judgment from heaven to chastise her partiality. She was a Roman Catholic, and I believe her confessor confirmed the idea which she had conceived. Accordingly, a few months after your departure for Ingolstadt, Justine was called home by her repentant mother. Poor girl. She wept when she quitted our house. She was much altered since the death of my aunt. Grief had given softness and a winning mildness to her manners which had before been remarkable for vivacity. Nor was her residence at her mother's house of a nature to restore her gaiety. The poor woman was very vacillating in her repentance. She sometimes begged Justine to forgive her unkindness, but much oftener accused her of having caused the deaths of her brothers and sister. Perpetual fretting at length threw Madame Moritz into a decline which at first increased her irritability, but she is now at peace forever. She died on the first approach of cold weather, at the beginning of this last winter. Justine has returned to us, and I assure you I love her tenderly. She is very clever and gentle and extremely pretty, as I mentioned before. Her mien and her expressions continually remind me of my dear aunt. I must also say a few words to you, my dear cousin, of little darling William. I wish you could see him. He's very tall at his age, with sweet, laughing blue eyes, dark eyelashes, and curling hair. When he smiles, 2 little dimples appear on each cheek, which are rosy with health. He has already had 1 or 2 little wives, but Louisa Biron is his favorite, a pretty little girl of 5 years of age. Now, dear Victor, I dare say you wish to be indulged in a little gossip concerning the good people of Geneva. The pretty Miss Mansfield has already received the congratulatory visits on her approaching marriage with a young Englishman, John Melbourne, Esquire. Her ugly sister Manon married M. Dullevard, the rich banker, last autumn. Your favorite schoolfellow, Louis Menoir, has suffered misfortune since the departure of Clairville from Geneva. But he has already recovered his spirits and is reported to be on the point of marrying a very lively, pretty Frenchwoman, Madame Tavernier. She's a widow and much older than Menoir, but she is very much admired and a favorite with everybody. I have written myself into better spirits, dear cousin, but my anxiety returns upon me as I conclude. Write, dearest Victor, 1 line, 1 word will be a blessing to us. 10,000 thanks to Henry for his kindness, his affection, and his many letters. We're sincerely grateful. Adieu, my cousin. Take care of yourself, and I entreat you write. Elizabeth Lavenza, Geneva, March 18th. 17 blankety blank. It was, that was about 3 pages of letter. She sure did go on. Luckily, it wasn't the whole chapter, actually. There's a bit more left. Dear Elizabeth, I explained when I had read the letter. I honestly don't give a shit about any of that. I just reanimated a guy. I exclaimed when I read her letter. I will write instantly and relieve them from the anxiety that they must feel. I wrote, and this exertion greatly fatigued me, but my convalescence had commenced, and proceeded regularly. In another fortnight, I was able to leave my chamber. One of my first duties on my recovery was to introduce Clairvaux to the several professors of the university. In doing this, I underwent a kind of rough usage, ill-befitting the wounds that my mind had sustained. Ever since the fatal night, the end of my labors and the beginning of my misfortunes, I had conceived a violent antipathy, even to the name of natural philosophy. When I was otherwise quite restored to health, the sight of a chemical instrument would renew all the agony of my nervous symptoms. He can't even look at the cool beakers he made. Henry saw this and removed all my apparatuses from my view. Oh my god. Looking at this beaker upsets him. Throws it out the window. He also changed my apartment, for he had perceived that I had acquired a dislike for the room which had previously been my laboratory. These were the cares of Clairvaux, which made no avail when I visited the professors. Waldman inflicted torture when he praised, with kindness and warmth, the astonishing progress I had made in the sciences. He soon perceived that I disliked the subject, but not guessing the real cause, he attributed my feelings to modesty, and changed the subject, from my improvement to the science itself, with a desire, as I evidently saw, of drawing me out. Yeah, I guess so. He was like, all this science stuff is upsetting you. I can't imagine what he put there in its place. We don't really know much about Clairvaux, other than that he didn't want to be a merchant. He wanted to get educated instead. I mean, I guess he definitely didn't put scales anywhere then. What could I do? He meant to please, and he tormented me. I felt as if he had placed carefully one by one in my view those instruments which were to be afterwards used in putting me into a slow and cruel death. I writhed under his words, yet dared not exhibit the pain I felt. Clairvaux, whose eyes and feelings were always quick in discerning the sensations of others, declined the subject, alleging in excuse his total ignorance, and the conversation took a more general turn. I thanked my friend from the heart, but I did not speak. I saw plainly that he was surprised, but never attempted to draw my secret from me. And although I loved him with a mixture of affection and reverence that knew no bounds, I could never persuade myself to confide to him that event which was so present in my recollection, by which I feared the detail to another would impress more deeply. Kremp was not equally docile, and in my condition at that time, of almost insupportable sensitiveness, his harsh, blunt, encomiums, gave me... A moment. Okay. Kremp was not equally docile, and in my condition at that time of almost insupportable sensitiveness, his harsh, blunt encomiums gave me even more pain than the benevolent approbation of Waldman. "Damn the fellow!" cried he, with damn censored. "Why, Clairvaux, I assure you he has outstripped us all. Stare if you please, But it is nevertheless true. A youngster who but a few years ago believed in Cornelius Agrippa as firmly as in the gospel has now set himself at the head of the university. And if he is not soon pulled down, we shall all be out of countenance. Aye, continued he, observing my face of suffering. Frankenstein is modest, an excellent quality in a young man. Young men should be diffident of themselves, you know. Clerval, I was myself when I was young. That wears off in a very short time. Kremp had now commenced a eulogy on himself, which happily turned the conversation from a subject that was so annoying to me. Clerval had never sympathized in my tastes for natural science, and his literary pursuits diffused wholly from those which had occupied me. He came to the university with the design of making himself complete master of the Oriental languages, and thus he should open a field for the plan of life he had marked out for himself. Resolved to pursue no inglorious career, he turned his eyes towards the east as an affording scope for his spirit of enterprise. The Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit languages engaged his attention, and I was easily induced to enter on the same studies. Idleness had ever become irksome to me, and now that I wished to fly from reflection and hated my former studies, I felt great relief in being the fellow pupil with my friend, and found not only instruction, but consolation in the works of the Orientalists. I did not, like him, attempt the critical knowledge of their dialects, for I did not contemplate making any other use of them than temporary amusement. I read merely to understand their meaning, and they well repaid my labors. Their melancholy is soothing, and their joy elevating, to a degree I never experienced in studying the authors of any other country. When you read their writings, life appears to consist in a warm sun and a garden of roses, in the smiles and frowns of a fair enemy, and the fire that consumes your own heart. How different from the manly and heroical poetry of Greece and Rome. Summer passed away in these occupations, and my return to Geneva was fixed for the later end of autumn. But being delayed by several accidents, winter and snow arrived, the roads were deemed impassable, and my journey was slowed until the ensuing spring. I felt this delay bitterly, for I longed to see my native town and my beloved friends. My return had only been delayed for so long from an unwillingness to leave Clerval in a strange place before he had become acquainted with any of its inhabitants. The winter, however, was spent cheerfully, and although the spring was uncommonly late, when it came, its beauty compensated for its dilatoriness. The month of May had already commenced, and I expected the letter daily which was to fix the date of my departure, when Henry proposed a pedestrian tour in the environs of Ingolstadt, that I might bid a personal farewell to the country I had so long inhabited. I acceded with pleasure to this proposition. I was fond of exercise. These next few sentences are highlighted. And Clerval had always been my favorite companion in the rambles of this nature that I had taken among the scenes of my native country. We passed a fortnight in these perambulations, my health and spirits had long been restored, and they gained additional strength from the salubrious air I breathed, the natural incidents of our progress, and the conversation of my friend. Why? Why is this section highlighted? They're literally just going on a pleasant walk. You know what this kind of feels like? It feels like this person had to, like, highlight passages and write notes in order to look busy. Or to, like, convince a professor who was, like, looking over their shoulder that they were, like, actually working. I mean, funny enough, honey, there's a lot of theories in literature that the relationship between Frankenstein and Clerval is based on the relationship between Percy B. Shelley and Lord Byron. So, so you're definitely not off the mark with that one. Study had before secluded me from the intercourse of my fellow creatures and rendered me unsocial. But Clairville called forth the better feelings of my heart. He again taught me to love the aspect of nature and the cheerful faces of children. John Highlighter, yeah. Well, he was fawning over, the doctor. In the parts early on in the letters. Clairville called forth the better feelings of my heart. He again taught me to love the aspect of nature and the cheerful faces of children. Excellent friend, how sincerely did you love me and endeavor to elevate my mind until it was on a level with your own? A selfish pursuit had cramped and narrowed me until your gentleness and affection warmed and opened my senses. I became the same happy creature who, a few years ago, loved and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care. When happy inanimate nature had the power of bestowing on me the most delightful sensations. A serene sky and verdant fields filled me with ecstasy. The present season was indeed divine. The flowers of spring bloomed in the hedges, while those of summer were already in bud. I was undisturbed by thoughts which during the preceding year had pressed upon me, notwithstanding my endeavors to throw them off with an invincible burden. Henry rejoiced in my gaiety, and sincerely sympathized in my feelings. He exerted himself to amuse me, while he expressed the sensations that filled his soul. The resources of his mind on this occasion were truly astonishing. His conversation was full of imagination, and very often in imitation of the Persian and Arabic writers. Which, again, is a bit of a Byronic thing. If anybody knows things about Lord Byron and how he ended up kind of getting embroiled a lot in Eastern things. He invented tales of wonderful fancy and passion. At other times, he repeated my favorite poems or drew me out into arguments which he supported with great ingenuity. We returned to our college on a Sunday afternoon. The peasants were dancing, and everyone we met appeared gay and happy. My own spirits were high, and I bounded along with feelings of unbridled joy and hilarity. And that is the end of Chapter 6. Okay, let's see. How long is Chapter 7? Do I think I can clear this out in 20 minutes? Doesn't look like it. Looks like this one is a bit of a longer one. So I probably won't be able to knock that out. So we're gonna put the bookmark in Frankenstein for now. Put that there. Alright, class. So what have you learned today about Frankenstein? Can you tell me about the themes, the ongoing leitmotifs of the story? I expect your book reports for next week. There, you like science? He definitely wants to smooch Clairville. Highlighter means foreshadowing. That's a good one. Worked himself into a nervous breakdown. That one's too real. Oh yeah, doesn't like science no more, sad face. Can't even look at beakers. Yeah, alchemy bad. Throw Paracelsus out a window. That's funny thinking of that, because actually the entire text of Dracula is basically written in the form of letters. It's journals and letters. But yeah, they didn't have Discord to send long ass messages. Man, reading reading Dracula now that I'm older and that I know a lot more about Victorian philosophies and about the history of Bram Stoker and his contemporaries. There's a few insane things that I've picked up on in terms of Dracula. Like, a lot of people know that the character of Dracula himself was historically based on Vlad Tepes, aka Vlad the Impaler, the old ruler who was fighting off the various forces, because historically the region of Hungary was beset on all sides by various conquering forces between the Ottomans, and even like reaching as far back as the conflicts between the Huns and the Romans and whatnot. So everybody knows that Dracula's Vlad the Impaler, right? But turns out that Dracula's character is based on two individuals that Bram Stoker knew. Primarily, he's based on Henry Irving, who was a theater actor and was kind of like Bram Stoker's mentor. Irving was running a theater. He basically ran the theater kind of to provide vehicles for him to act in, to further his career and whatnot. And Stoker was actually, and this might be a bit of hearsay, but it's said a lot that Stoker was actually in love with both Henry Irving and Henry Irving's wife, who was also an actor. And she wanted to, like, perform some bigger parts for herself where she would be in the lead, but Henry Irving never allowed that because it was his show. It was all about him. He was the lead. She could only play supporting roles for him, which led Stoker to resent Henry Irving in a lot of ways, both out of jealousy and because of the way that he behaved with the theater company and his wife. But another is one of Bram Stoker's former friends. Dracula may have also been based on Oscar Wilde, the writer. Oscar Wilde, novelist and playwright. Because Stoker actually ended up feeling kind of betrayed by Oscar Wilde when Oscar Wilde went through his whole thing that ended up with him in prison, which you can look into the history of. But yeah, reading it through the lens of the things that I know now, boy does that book make you root for Dracula. As opposed to the other characters with the modern contexts that we have. But yeah, it's an interesting new lens to be reading it through. And I will say that in terms of the stories between Dracula and Frankenstein, I've honestly always been in terms of the whole package, I've always been more partial to Frankenstein, honestly. I think the stuff about the modern Prometheus is a very wonderful theme throughout it. I think it kicks the hell out of Dracula's ass in terms of the theming. Considering the theming of Dracula a lot of the time comes down to, ah yes, Victorians are pure and good, foreigners are super evil. And Romanticism and the Romantic movement has always been a lot of Bearman's thing. I'm super into romanticism, and the cover of this version of Frankenstein actually has my favorite painting on it. Let me see if I can get the cover of this version. But I bet that Honey could guess which one is my favorite painting, and I know that if Sarah was here, she could guess it easily. Yep, you've got it, Honey. Okay, so here's the... I believe this is the exact version that I have, too. Oh, goddammit, Pinterest. Sorry, let me just grab this picture from Pinterest. There we go. So it is, of course, this painting. Yeah, this is the one that I have. Which is Caspar David Friedrich's Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. Famous romantic painting. This is my favorite painting, this one. Because I feel this. I feel this man emotionally. This man has a little bit of the same energy that's in this emotion. Is that me? He's a little like me. He's just like me for real. But yeah, I definitely, Bearman, definitely a bigger fan of the Romantics than the Victorians. Is I guess the takeaway there. But yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. This has been my first reading stream of Frankenstein. I'll definitely be doing more of this. This is going to be every Wednesday. We're going to be doing some reading streams. So I hope that you will look forward to more. We've actually gotten quite a ways in. We're about 1/3 of the way through the book. So it might not take me all 4 streams this month, so I might have to try and line up another story other than just Frankenstein to do this month. We'll see how that ends up going. But yeah, this was a Dragul. This was a fun venture. Having the background and the little moth bear. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Yeah, I'll definitely be doing some sips. And yeah, tomorrow we're going to be returning to Phantasmagoria. We're going to be ending that one off. And just various other things throughout the week. I'll keep you guys updated on what we end up doing. I might do movie nights on Fridays, because I do want to do that viewing of The Raven and Young Frankenstein, and maybe a few others. I might make it a theme, because we're doing FMVs. Also, thank you, owner of Bisky. Thank you very much. Because we're doing all those FMV games, this might be this might be a good time to do those kind of Halloween comedies for movie nights. I think that might kind of suit the overall theme of goofiness that we've got going on this month. But yeah, thank you again very much for watching, everybody.